the main thing is that he was passionate in his own way on all these four fronts. But the question is that when you think about succession, what happens after you get tired or your priorities shift? And that wasn't an easy case, because Pekka had been able to grow and build a serious company, but the family relationships were not that easy. It's good to remember that all his predecessors, the grandfather and father, they essentially left the entire estate to one of the children.
Welcome to Category Leaders, where Marty and I tell the story of best in the world, based in Europe companies who have won their category globally. The story we're telling today is of a Finnish company, KONE. Now, most people have never heard of today's category leader, which is a little bit strange, because if you're listening to this in a city, and most of us live in cities these days, there's a very good chance that KONE has interacted with you in the last 24 hours. Maybe it was this morning, maybe it was yesterday, maybe it was getting you from in an apartment building to your office, maybe it was a hotel, maybe it was in an airport or a metro station. And the funny thing about KONE is the name is right there. They label their machines, right? That elevator or lift, depending on which side of the Atlantic you're on, has a KONE sticker on it, or a KONE control panel, or a KONE maintenance chart. If you stand on an escalator or a travelator and you look for the word, it's there. But most of us don't look, because in this particular category, right, success is actually disappearing into the background. Nobody gets into an elevator and thinks, what an extraordinary piece of control motion this is. Nobody steps onto an escalator and thinks, this machine is making the modern airport possible. And nobody walks through a building and says, this place only works because vertical movement has become safe, reliable, regulated, maintained, and trusted. Nobody thinks like that. But this is that category. This is about movement of people and things in space. And this has transformed the world that we live in. So this month's category leader is KONE, a Finnish company founded in 1910 and shaped for more than a century by a family, and now one of the most important movement companies in the world.
Yeah, well, to be fair with you, Colin, if you are working in business, engineering, anything in Finland, all those people absolutely know KONE, because KONE has been the, let's say, the showcase of Finnish engineering and industrial expertise for a long period of time. And at least already as a little boy, I was enthusiastic to see KONE logo in the elevator, because of course an elevator was a miracle machine for a small guy like myself. But anyway, it is absolutely clear that most people don't on a daily basis think about the manufacturer of the elevator or the escalator or any of those things. But KONE in itself is absolutely a category leader already today. It's based in Europe. It's best in the world, in our not so humble opinion, and it's already 11 billion in annual sales, moves around 2 billion people every day, operates in close to 70 countries, and has roughly 1.8 million units in its service base. And of course, the timing of this episode is of course great, because last month, approximately a month ago, KONE announced an agreement to combine with TK Elevators, which is a transaction implying 29.4 billion enterprise value for TKE. And if approved by the competition authorities, the combined company would have around 20 billion in annual sales, more than 100,000 employees, which would make KONE the biggest organization headquartered in Finland. Bigger than the government, bigger than the other companies that are headquartered in Finland. So it's absolutely huge, and clearly the largest elevator and escalator company in the world by sales. So this is not just the story and establishment of an industrial story that is 11 billion today. It may be beyond 20 billion European category leader being formed in real time. But the specific deal is not the only reason why we are interested in doing this. It's the whole story how KONE got here. It's more than 100 years of industrial history and very, very strong leaderships in the various phases. And a very, very strange thing, even if this is a publicly listed company, it's essentially been managed like a family company all these years. Because the key story that we have here, in addition to the machinery, to the service business model, all the software controls, all that, this is an industrial dynasty of the Herlin family, or Herlin, we should be pronouncing in the Finnish way, who bought KONE in the 1920s and has stayed with the company, with the industry through wars, reconstruction of Finland after the war, has built the technical competence, has divested important companies, and therefore their influence has been much, much more than just the company that we see today. They are clearly a showcase of Finnish industrial development during the last 100 and some years.
So, listeners, we normally do these category leaders in 5 acts. So that's the narrative section. Then Marty and I will move to an analysis where we'll really focus on where is the business today and its performance and where do we see it in the future. And it's kind of 7 powers. And then we kind of wrap it up with a quintessence, which is what is the thing that we can't help thinking about having told this story. So to keep you honest, we have basically 4 main protagonists that we're going to focus on, the family members, and then we'll also look at it. So we're going to start with we're going to run through in this order. It's Harold is first, then Heikki, then we go wide and look at cities, then we look at Pekka, and then we look at Antti. So this is like, great-grandfather, grandfather, son, and etc. So we're moving in that particular order. So we're going to start back in 1874. So Harold, who's the first protagonist that we cover, is born on the 30th of August, 1874, into a large family, which is basically entrepreneurial and business in its bloodstream. But it's not wealthy, right? Sadly for Harold, his father, Albert, has several ventures, but none of them create a great fortune for the family. And in 1890, and Harold's only kind of 16 at this point, Albert dies of blood poisoning. And his mother, Hannah, has to keep the children moving, right? She has to put, bread on the table, a roof over the head. So what she does next is she sells off parts of the family businesses that weren't working, and she opens a toy shop in central Helsinki. But a toy shop, though it sounds charming and quite small, is kind of almost a seed for the business that's going to come. Because in the late 19th century, Finland, it's not normal for a woman to run her own business in her own name. And Hannah builds this small toy shop. She develops supply relationships across Europe. She imports the newest goods and sells into a Helsinki middle class that at this stage in the late 1870s, early 1890s is starting to grow. So Harold kind of grows up with 2 lessons in his family. Business is normal, but security is not. Okay, so that's one of his kind of shaping origin stories, where his mum is kind of founding a business, and again, this is his early life story, basically a small store in Helsinki.
Yes, and the shop's name is in Swedish, Hanna Herlin's Leksaksmagasin. That tells you the social world he comes from. Educated Swedish-speaking Finland, European connections, but also inside the Russian Empire. It's good to remember that Finland in those days was actually a semi-independent Grand Duchy within the Russian Empire. We had our own parliament, we had our own money, our own government officials. However, toward the end of that specific century, under the rule of Tsar Nikolai II, the Russification of this rebellious Grand Duchy had been started, and a lot of the Finnish pride and the Finnish the appreciation of Finnish culture actually dates from those times, the end of the 19th century, the beginning of 20th, and that's really the key story here. And in the whole building of the Finnish society and eventually gaining gaining the independence later on, that was really the core story here. Harald, as the young man, studied at the Polytechnic Institute in Helsinki, and in those days, railways were the big thing. And railways were providing that was the great infrastructure element that was being built, and that also, in addition to giving the framework for Harald's education, also gave him a practical work because he was working with railway projects early on, for example, in Rauma-Peipohja area or Jokioinen and Forssa, which are all in the, let's say, in the southwestern part of Finland. And they were very, very practical works. And really building the infrastructure was very, very important there. And that also then results into his interest in the technologies that we have for KONE. Anyway, Harald as a young man met with Minna Westerlund in Forssa during those activities, and whose father was the factory doctor, a respected physician, and later on also as an anthropologist. Minna becomes an educated Swedish-speaking Ostrobotnian background cultured serious professional. Harald and Minna married in 1900, and they began their married life in Helsinki. Home was a place of family life, and the son Heikki, who's going to be then the next protagonist, was born in 1901. Also 2 daughters, Kirsti and Iri. Swedish language is heard, Finnish matters, English is admired, Russian is a part of the wider imperial environment. It's also important to remember that in those days all these languages were very much present in the everyday life in Helsinki. So this was not a closed Finnish household, it was outward looking, multilingual, practical and ambitious. Anyway, Harald moved away from the railway projects, worked in the city buildings and public works system, focusing on water and sewage. And water and sewage, yet another segment of infrastructure, was important because Helsinki was changing fast. It had around 23,000 people in 1875. It became the capital of Finland during the Russian rule. I mean, Turku was the capital of Finland before that, so Helsinki was a relatively minor city before it was administratively declared as the capital. And when we come to the early 1900s, we are beyond 100,000 inhabitants. And new districts are being banned, buildings are rising, apartments are getting central heating, electric lighting, water and sewage systems. So the city was a major technical object. Water has to come in, waste has to go out, etc., etc. And as the second and third children were being born, it was the time for Harald to found a company. So in February 1904, he founds the company Vesijohtoliike, why Vesijohtoliike AB, which means essentially a water pipe company. So not KONE at that time. And he did that with his friend Toivo Sulberg, who also was a member of another industrial family. And they were in the waterworks or plumbing business. Manufactured, supplied, and installed water and heating systems for apartment buildings, industrial plants, and other properties. So that was really the beginning. The division of labor was very, very clear. Harald was the managing director and the guy responsible for the operations. And Toivo Sulberg was providing capital and becomes the chairman of the board. So this is essentially kind of a KONE before KONE. It's not a product, it's an operating logic. Technical systems, installation, reliability elements were already then. And what is also very important is the multi-stakeholder environment where you have to deal with contractors, city officials, architects, builders, property owners. So it's a very, very specific thing. Rather than just serving one customer, you have to deal with many, many stakeholders. And the growth by 1912, more than 200 workers already, and annual turnover approaching 4 million Finnish marks on those days. So this is a proper operating company, not a sideline business or a side hustle. And Harald learned several things in this activity that will matter later on. It's a competitive strategy, negotiating with the subcontractors and partners, understanding the installation markets can be very easily become local power games. Politics, is everywhere in that activity. And of course the working capital pressure. All these installation works often get paid only after completion and acceptance. So there's a huge amount of working capital that is needed. And the numbers will change his life. By 1914, Harald's personal wealth is more than 700,000 Finnmarks, over 10 times what it had been as he left the official life in 1904. His largest single asset is his plumbing company shareholding. So Harald really learned the ropes in this activity, and that's really the key element here.
Yeah, and again, listeners, we've gone through Harold's life fairly fast, but again, I just want to help you kind of grasp what he's done, right? So his father has died when he was young. He's finished his university studies. He's become a land surveyor. He's got married. Found the woman of his dreams. He's worked in kind of infrastructure projects for the city, and the city is transforming. Helsinki is going from this sleepy backwater. It's not big, but we've gone from 23,000 to 100,000, right? We've quadrupled the city in his lifetime so far. And then he's founded his first company, not KONE. It's done well because it's lent hard into the infrastructure times. But don't believe any of this is easy, right? Because this is very difficult, choppy conditions. Yeah, a lot less laws than there were, but an awful lot more kind of politics with a small p. Lots of labor strikes, lots of stuff happens. Right? This is a very unstable Grand Duchy at this particular point. Yeah. So it's quite choppy what he's sailing into. And again, even though he's made some very good money now, he's worried because effectively the business climate is boom and bust, right? And it can all be taken away very quickly. So Marty, he kind of does something at this point when he gets his first cash, which I kind of wasn't expecting. He puts it into land.
Yeah, and the land. I mean, I find it kind of very understandable that land in itself represents continuity. Like some people say that the land is always going to be valuable because they don't make that anymore. The production is stopped, even if that is, of course, not literally true either. But the commitment to have land, to have own property, was so strong that in 1912, Harald buys Torsvik Manor in Kirkkonummi, which is on the western side from Helsinki, not too far actually from downtown Helsinki. And he has to borrow money. And of course, money in those days is not cheap. I mean, your interest rates are tangible, and you need to be providing some collateral or somebody guaranteeing the loan. So Toivo Sulberg and Nestori Eskola were the ones who were guaranteeing the 50,000 mark loan from Turun Osakepankki. And it was really a question that in order to pay for all the debts he had, there was only one way. You have to make the company that you have established very successful. And that was a very, very risky decision, but it shows the importance of owning your own land and rooting yourself somewhere, not just into a city apartment. So KONE is not yet in the family, but the two-world pattern is forming here. It's the technical side, the engineering side, the real estate side, what you do in the city in order to build the nation, and at the same time you are very, very strongly rooted into the land, in the countryside, to your manor, and this is a pivotal point in the whole history.
Yeah, and again, listeners, we know that history doesn't repeat, but it definitely rhymes. And as you go through this story with us, you'll hear a number of rhyming historical points. And I think, remember also, Harold doesn't come from a land-owning family, right? There's a toy shop involved and there's various business ventures. But effectively, one of the first things he does as soon as he gets a little bit of money is he basically buys that land, and that farm becomes a really core, it's a character in itself, right? We're talking about Harold and Heikki and Pekka and Antti, but the farm is also a character in this story, and it's a place where the family will return to time and time again. Okay, so First World War happens. So actually, that's pretty good, right? Sadly, it was terrible for the world, but pretty good for Harold and his fortune. The company sells large quantities of wrought iron pipes towards the Russian military market. Remember, we're in a Grand Duchy. We're part of the Russian Empire at this point. Turnover for Harold's company rises to about 3 million marks. And by 1916, the business reaches almost 8 million marks. Okay, so it's doubling kind of year on year type 5. So the wartime cash payments leave significant money in the company, and that's where Harold gets the finances to basically, continue paying off his debts on the farm. Sadly, Harold's co-founder Tovio dies of pneumonia on the 24th of June 1916. And this is a turning point for Harold because he's lost his co-founder, but he's also lost his friend, his business partner, and he's on his own now running the company, right? In terms of that leadership position. But what this first business has given him is it's given him capital, it's given him credibility, and very importantly, and this plays into the next act, it's given Harold banking relationships. Now, he's going to need all of these because 1917 is a pivotal year in Finland, but not necessarily it's going to be memorable. Marty, what happens then?
Yeah, well, I mean, we had the Russian Revolution. The Tsar is toppled, and actually the whole family is killed by the revolutionaries. And what happens in Finland at the same time is that when we remember that the Russian Revolution was about the working class, that the needs to get the fair share of the value that they produce, and it was a very, very class or politically oriented revolution. We had the same mindsets on the Finnish side. We had people who were very much in favor of the labor movement, and there were others who were appreciating more let's say, the market economy. I mean, of course, in Finland it was not that black and white in a way, but many people ended up being either associated with the so-called white side or the red side, where the red side was really the more leftish people, and the most extreme of them were of the opinion that we should join Soviet Union as part of the labor revolution. But not everybody. I mean, most of the people who were put on either side were actually, they ended up being there without having a very, very strong personal commitment. But anyway, we had a brutal civil war. Civil wars are always brutal. It ended up being the white side being victorious, and these wounds that were created in these times, they have lasted for a long, long period of time. And even today, even if it is well more than 100 years from these events, most of the Finnish people, they recognize on which side their ancestors were in those days. So it's not an easy thing. The wounds were very, very deep. So the question is, where was Harald here in the beginning of the conflict?
How did he get through this? Like,
yeah, well, I mean,
he's a business owner.
Well, I mean, in the beginning, he was in Torsvik, which is, half an hour drive. I mean, those days, probably 45 minutes drive from Helsinki, where Minna and the children, while the Minna and children were actually in Helsinki, the railway connection between these areas were disrupted, and revolutionary forces controlled movement. So it was very, very complex times. And eventually, what happens that the Red forces are actually raiding Torsvik, looking for Harald, and stuff was stolen: food, clothes, horses, all kinds of that. So you're a businessman, you're a property owner, you believe in institutions, you believe in order, improvement, working together, and suddenly your country breaks in two. So your family is separated, the estate is vulnerable. So this is really shaking your whole world, and it was very, very frustrating time for everybody. So this has to shape you.
Yeah, and again, listeners, you're probably not familiar with the Finnish Civil War, but you are familiar with other civil wars, American, etc., etc. So again, just put yourself in Harold's shoes, right? Literally, the Civil War has broken out in your country, and you don't, and it's not so much, there is a geographical element to this, but it's also a kind of armed people running around stealing stuff. There is sadly examples of industrialists killed by their own workers, right, at their own factories. So there's a lot going on, and it's a very, very scary time. Right. And again, I think, where Harold gets through this, no spoilers, he gets through this, but he comes out very much more focused on control than he was beforehand.
Yeah, that's clearly the case. I mean, when you lose control, you try to remedy the thing. I mean, this is a very, very human way of thinking. And then the question comes that who owns the assets? Who can you trust? When you can't trust your labor, you can't trust your neighbor. Who controls movement? Who controls everything? And I mean, the concern is on both sides. This is not only on the class of the owners and the capitalists. Everybody's concerned about the same things because essentially people are not that different after all. And so when we later on see Harald buying KONE, it's not just a, how should I, sterile, clever financial transaction based on numbers and making an investment that turns out to be very positive. It's a part of a worldview. It's part of the values that you gain through all these extreme experiences. So if the world around you is unstable, you need ownership. You need capable people. You need people who you can trust. You need systems that do not collapse immediately when they are being pressured by forces that are beyond your control. And for a small country like Finland, struggling for the independence and trying to find their own identity, it's especially acute. Foreign capital is nearby, Swedish industrial capital is nearby, German and Swiss technology are nearby, Russian power is never far away. So the question is always, can Finnish capability remain under Finnish control? So this is the key KONE question. And what is very, very important here to remember that even if the family name Herlin is Swedish originally, very quickly the Herlin, the family history has been very strongly Finnish rather than being Swedish.
Yeah, very much so. So it's not a massive surprise that after the war, Harold decides to sell the first company. Right? He's lost his co-founder. He's been through a situation where he's literally running for his life, right? And ultimately, there was a lot of labor strikes that were kind of skirting over that makes his decision to sell it's emotional, but it's the right decision for him. And financially, it gives him a lot of cash in the bank that he can do something with. So he owns 1,344 shares of the business. It's worth about 2 million marks. Okay, he buys a few apartments, he pays down his debts, and he starts looking to invest, right? And by the end of 1922, his net worth is 4.5 million marks, right? Like, he's done super well, right? Remember, he left basically public service and founded this company in 1904. And by 1922, he's basically a millionaire in those terms. So when KONE appears on his radar, and we're going to tell a little bit more about the preceding story of KONE in a second, Harold's not starting from zero. He has capital, he has property, he has bank credibility. This is very important. He's got experience of restructuring and building an infrastructure business, and he can start to allocate capital. And he gets pulled into a crisis through his banking relationships, almost to come in to act almost like a turnaround artist or somebody who will look at a problem. And the problem is quite a famous word or a surname, and it's Stromberg, right? So, Marty, who were the Strombergs?
Well, I mean, Gottfried Stromberg, clearly a German name. Originally, it was one of the, or if probably the most important electrical engineering business in Finland. Motors, generators, electrical equipment, power systems, and the connection with the elevators is that some of those technologies are in the key position in building an elevator. The elevator business was established in 1910 inside the Stromberg world. And in the beginning, it was just this very, very practical machine business. Repair used electric motors, imported elevators installation. And it imported Swedish designed elevators, and in 1918 began making and installing its own elevators. And the motor relationship is crucial because, I mean, the motors and the controls thereof were really the key technical components that make elevators possible. In the early contracts, KONE received 25% discount on motors and later still received significant discounts. So this is not a small deal. Elevator is not just the cabin, it's really everything else that makes it happen. So early KONE had something very valuable. It was close to the motor, it was close to the installer, the customer, the building, but it was very, very small. It was a side hustle of this company, and the market, which is very important to understand, that the market in these days was very, very fragmented. You had local, very, very local markets everywhere. In all of the countries where elevators were built, the builders or the buildings, they were relying on the local suppliers. So there was no standardization. It was all very, very fragmented. And there were many, many manufacturers everywhere, including in United States. Otis was established already before that. And the foreign technology, of course, carried prestige. So KONE in itself has to be credible because, I mean, relying yourself at the mercy of the elevator and the elevator producer, of course, you need to have confidence as the user of elevators. So you have to project this credible image before you can grow to be very, very important. So now we get to the key question. Strömberg was there and still colloquially many times referred in Finland as Romppanen, which is a very, very, let's say, very, very colloquial Finnish translation from the word Strömberg is Romppanen, much more Finnish sounding name. But still people talk about, I was working at Romppanen before all these mergers and acquisitions. But anyway, the question is, why did Harald get involved with KONE business?
Before we, because I want to answer that question, or try to, Marty, what does KONE mean?
It means machine.
So,
I mean,
so the listeners,
you definitely did not need a communications specialist and paid millions of today's dollars or euros for that specific branding exercise.
Listeners, if you want marketing advice, come to Finland. Come to Finland in the 1900s, because we're just going to call this small machine workshop that basically initially kind of licensed other people's elevators and then builds its own elevators. We're just going to call it Machine. And now, just to be clear, it's a short brand, right? And it's very memorable, right? So we like all of those things. Okay, so why does Harold buy it? This is this initial question. Because again, listeners, put yourself in Harold's shoes. He's got money in the bank, but he is not a VC or an investor type, right? Like he's a land surveyor that's built. He's a former founder. Let's put him in those shoes. And he buys, and he's brought in basically to look at this from a bank's perspective because they're worried because Stromberg is in trouble, right? It's hemorrhaging cash, right? And so one of the ones that Harold can see is that effectively Stromberg has lost its leadership. The creditors are worried. The company's facing huge debts. But this little machine shop, this KONE, is actually profitable. Right now, can Harold come in and effectively take the profit? Now, it doesn't make much sense from Stromberg's service if you think of it from this perspective. Can he buy the profitable entity to save the parent? But in this case, what he's doing is if he buys the profitable entity, he's giving the parent something it desperately needs at this point in time, which is effectively cash, right? So effectively, Harold calculates that KONE might be worth about 1.3 million marks, negotiates it down to 1 million, and basically gives them 400,000 marks in cash immediately if they do the deal, and then 600,000 marks within a week. Okay, so good figure to remember. He pays 1 million marks, right, for basically this small business founded in 1910, KONE. He signs the deal on the 22nd of February, 1924. Harold gets 810 shares, around 80% of the company. And from that point on, KONE and this family, their kind of history is tied together, Okay, but don't look at this as a romantic. Look at this as a distressed sale, a bank-driven restructuring, and a capable buyer moving quickly and negotiating a tough deal. He buys a small, profitable business, yeah, but just also remember the date. We're in the 1924, we're in the 1920s. There is a lot happening in the world, right? But he's bought the company, and it's the company story that we'll tell alongside the families.
Yeah, and I mean the other thing which is I think key to hear here that even if Strömberg turns out to be a very, very successful company and later on part of the ABB Corporation, this whole divestment was driven by the bank who had loaned money had borrowed money to the company, and they were selling the only viable part of the Strömberg infrastructure. So this is in a way a crazy thing. The lack of commitment from the founding organization is what drove this whole thing. But anyway, the thing is that Harald sees the value, sees the opportunity, and is able to move on. And after the purchase, he continues moving very, very boldly forward. He calls the shareholders meeting. The board is reorganized. Harald becomes the chairman. Gottfried Strömberg joins the board, along with trusted figures from Harald's network. But KONE's operating competence is not thrown away. Lorenz Petrell stays as the managing director. Walter Jakobsson stays as the technical director. These are people with years of experience in developing, manufacturing, installing and servicing elevators. Erik Ingvall leads design. Gotthard Dahlberg takes charge of service and installation. So the core competence that, of course, Harald didn't have. He knew very little, if anything, about elevators as a business. He knew something, other stuff around the buildings and new construction, but clearly he maintained the core competence of the company and the key people of the company so that he didn't end up buying an empty shell and a brand alone. So this was, I think, a very, very clever decision and an important decision. And of course, the whole thing is that his son Heikki is already there in Harald's mind, getting closer to the company, even if Heikki didn't necessarily see as his future, but clearly the future succession plan was initiated in these days, and what was interesting is that this was not solved by just father putting the son to work in the company. There was a more cunning plan in play here, because Harald sent Heikki to Europe and America to study elevator technology and competitors' production systems. So the first stop is Braun Boveri in Mannheim in Germany, and then America, and eventually the most interesting name in elevators in those days, Otis. So this is what this means is that they are building the family understanding of the elevator business, and they are setting the first critical steps for the succession planning. Even if the company had been just acquired, there's already a success plan in mind.
Yeah. I think I love this particular part of the story because, again, if you see Harold as the kind of entrepreneur that has one good business under his belt, he then basically takes over this other distressed asset. He keeps the management team in place. Marty, you're absolutely spot on. I think he recognizes their capability, their technical skills. And then the reason he's buying an elevator company, and just to be clear, listeners, if you visit Helsinki, it is not known for its skyscrapers, right? Finland is not the market, right? Or Finland is a small part of the market, right? But what he recognizes is and remember, this is someone who's seen his own city quadruple in 4 years in his lifetime, right? He's recognizing this global trend of people moving into the cities, and he's recognizing that effectively there's an opportunity to basically build into this space. So Harold's still with us. We've not lost him yet, but effectively the next act is very much about the son, Heikki. So Heikki is born in 1901, right? And again, his childhood is very different from Harold's, right? He still has this common father figure all the way through his life. He still has this range of languages around him that Harold had. But there are other things that catches his eye, right? So he's into machinery. There's a lot more machines around in his world. There is agricultural machines, there's cars, there's engines, there's shipyards, there's everything is machine, not just the name of the company that his dad has just bought, right? So Heikki grows up in a different world. There is a generational difference here, right? And he's still very young when the Civil War takes place, so he kind of gets through that. It's scary and he's a teenager, but effectively it's kind of over by the time he kind of comes into adulthood. And again, don't think of him being at this stage too groomed for success. This is still an early business that his father's taken on when he is Harold buys it when he's 24. Heikki is literally 23 when he buys it. This is a new thing for dad, and let's see how I fit into the plan.
Yeah. And the other thing which is also, I think, very, very interesting here is that if I think of all the people that I've met during my professional life, when you are dealing with somebody who grew up on a farm with all the farm machinery, they are typically the people who are very, very mechanically inclined and good with their hands. So when you are dealing with engineers who have a background in farming, in farm life, they are typically the people who are not only calculating, they are really able to take any tools and work on every equipment at any given time, because the life on farms is about maintaining and repairing the equipment that breaks down. And the nature doesn't wait. The weather doesn't wait for you to fix the machines. You have to fix them right away. So we get to the part of what Heikki was doing in Germany and later on in United States. And like I already mentioned, Brown Boveri in Mannheim was the first position that he gets, one of the great Swiss-German electrical engineering companies. And it's a very, very different world compared to the workshop tradition, the industrial tradition we had in Finland in those days, because Brown Boveri is industrial Europe at scale. Turbines, boilers, electrical systems, heavy machinery, drawing offices, production discipline, quality control, serial production. So Heikki arrives as a young Finnish engineer and sees the difference immediately. How the production is organized and how the work stages are tracked, how drawings and the accuracy of the drawings matters, how processes matter. So, I mean, essentially he saw a true industrial company for the first time. So this is one of the first lessons. Industrial excellence is not only invention. How true today, when you think about it, Colin. It's not only about having your invention, it's about producing it, your invention at scale, so that you can make money at the same time. I mean, it's always how you control your costs, how you maximize your production. It's the organization. And that's exactly what also elevators will require. Because an elevator is definitely a system that punishes you if you've been sloppy. It's not just one brilliant machine, it's actually a system. It's essentially a system rather than being just simple product. Everything related to the motor, the brake, the elevator shaft, doors, controls, installation, everything. It's a system that needs to be run and maintained like a system needs to be. So it's not you just sending a quality inspector to check that the machine works in the end. You have to build for quality. You have to build for the certain cost so that it can be profitably sold forward. So these are the things that we typically take for granted today, but 100 years ago, they were not in everybody's recent memory. And Germany in those days was already an industrial powerhouse and continued to be an industrial powerhouse. And that's really the case. But so is growing America. So what happened in the United States? Can you shed some light on that, Colin?
Yes. And listeners, again, if you're finding these characters in 1901 too hard to relate to, think about the most famous farm boy of recent years that you probably didn't know was a farm boy. Jeff Bezos grew up in a farm, right? He spent his early summers working in a farm in Texas with his grandfather, fixing machinery, fixing cranes, making his own nails, all that sort of stuff. So if you're struggling to relate to Heikki, think of him as an early Jeff Bezos, right? Self-reliant farm boy, learning how things got done if you did them, right? Now, Jeff went to New York and kind of created his little a hedge fund kind of career. Heikki also wants to go to America, right? This is his extend out and kind of circle back period, right? He travels to America. He spends a year or two in the States, and he basically is on tour. He wants to basically go and visit and study companies like General Electric, Ohio Brass, Detroit manufacturers, and he wants to get a job at Otis. Or, sorry, he wants to find a way to kind of understand how modern elevators are kind of being created. And this is not America of today. This is America of the 1900s, which is an industrial rising powerhouse. Right, this is where the Empire State Building is going up, basically one floor a day or something crazy, right? This is skyscraper city. This is where elevators are coming from, and they're made to. And then effectively, Heikki, I love this. He turns up at the factory gate at Otis and asks for a job. Possibly they don't even know his surname is linked to elevators, and he gets turned away. He then applies through an employment agency and basically gets a job at Otis. But working in Otis is not easy, right? The manufacturing, the talent density, the rigor of his designs all come into question, right? And in 1927, he does a presentation on modern elevators, sent it back to Finland, and mechanical safety devices. And I'm not even going to try and pronounce this. So Marty, what was his presentation?
Well, the presentation was simple. It was nykyaikaisten hissien mekaanisista varmuuslaitteista, which is, on the mechanical safety devices of modern elevators. And because that was really Otis's great one. It already happened years before, but one of the key sales point of Otis for the elevators was really the safety mechanisms that he implies. So we have Mr. Otis to really thank for all that. So that was really not just marketing or decoration. It was safety devices, because everybody understands that people need to be comfortable in using the elevators if you want to use them. So this is the trust category, and eventually, if you are able to demonstrate the safety of these devices, then you can expect also those to sell. So this is a core element that Heikki was bringing back from United States.
Yeah, and look, I love the story of Heikki in the US, to be perfectly honest. And again, listeners, he's later, he's done the work at Otis. He's only there for about 8 or 9 months. He's sketching some of the designs. Don't think of him as an industrial spy. That's kind of overstating his position. He's learning what industrial processes look like. Like, he's learning from the best at that particular point in time. And actually, I think there's a part of him that really wants to stay in America, right? Really wants to kind of get away from the family. Sorry, Harold, right? And basically create his life for himself in the States, right? And then there's a lovely moment in the kind of in the library where he's kind of torn of, do I stay or do I go in America? And then he reads this piece of Finnish literature, just randomly picks it off a shelf, right? The universe kind of tells him, and he sits down there and reads this piece of Finnish literature, and there's this wave of nostalgia for home and, the beautiful forests and the lakes of Finland and the farm kind of washes over him. And he decides that America isn't where his fortune needs to be made. And actually, he needs to kind of circle back to Finland, right? So he ends his American journey and he comes home.
Yeah. And when he comes home, the KONE is really trying to grow in importance, competing with the foreign companies and elevator suppliers, and there are 2 very, very core projects in the late 20s, early 30s that KONE wins, and there's an interesting element here, because the two projects were Stockman and the Houses of Parliament in Helsinki. And here it was clearly a case that they also started doing some political lobbying in order to get a Finnish supplier to these important projects. And it's they eventually won. They were not easy things to win, but then timing once again becomes very, very difficult. And it's 1932 now.
Yeah. And 1932 is going to be a tough year. But quickly explain Stockman's relevance to Finns.
Yeah,
right?
well,
Because if you've not been to Helsinki and not stood outside it, you kind of don't get it. What is
well,
Stockman?
well, I mean, for all Brits out there, it was like Harrods of Finland, or Macy's, or Neiman Marcus of United States. It was the number one department store in Helsinki, and for decades to come, it was the number one, the most prestigious department store, and winning that specific thing, because there were so many customers who used those elevators every single day. That was really a showcase opportunity to win, and gladly they won.
Yeah, absolutely. And this becomes the big showcase. But back to the story 9. In 1952, Lorenz, the managing director, basically retires. Harold steps in temporarily, but really it is a temporary fix because Heikki is going to take over. He's come back from the US. He's just fully immersed himself in the world of Otis and everything else. But another thing came back with Heikki, not just the kind of Heikki coming back, the depression that had started very much in America at the end of 1929, the collapse of the stock market, isn't just one big event, it's a kind of deflating of a bubble. And the depression crushes the construction orders. KONE's new elevator orders are low. There's only 68 new orders in 1932, right? Heikki is kind of involved in other bits of the KONE business because he doesn't want to fully commit at this stage, even though he's come back to Finland. Does he really want to work under his dad? Right? So at this stage in the 1930s, KONE is not a slam dunk global category leading company. It's fragile, right? Harold has bought the machine, but Heikki now has the problem of actually making it operate in a very challenging depression-led market.
Yeah, and I mean the other thing is, which is with all four protagonists that we go through in this episode, each and every generation are strong in their own way, and the next generation always understands how strong their fathers are, and all the sons who will eventually become successors, they know it's not easy to work under a very, very strong father. So Harald is still there at this specific time, and even if it sometimes we may get the perception that the handing over a family company to the next generation is kind of easy, but it isn't. Most of the time, it isn't, and there are all kinds of challenges, especially if you think about the organization. If the organization that will get a new leader from the next generation feels that the son is there only for the reasons of nepotism, they are just being handed over a business without having qualifications of their own, the organization will not respect the new leader. And just having the formal power is not enough to have the committed organization to perform at its best. So Heikki definitely has shown some technical credibility, but it's, I mean, in a way you could say that like every crisis all dark clouds have a golden rim. It's probably the timing or the generational stage when the business is not booming rapidly is probably even helping Heikki to move closer and eventually to move in.
Yeah, because at this stage, KONE needs Heikki's expertise, and these are expertise that Harold didn't truly have, right? Heikki is kind of the engineer's engineer, right? He has the technical understanding, he has the love of the machine, he can work between architects, builders, regulators. he can make things work, right? And by the late 1930s, Heikki steers KONE through this difficult period of the Depression, right? And he works hard, he wins the contracts, right? And it's really interesting. I studied Heikki's life quite in depth, and I really enjoyed his story, right? There's a lot to like about Heikki as he progresses through. And what was also very interesting is that he kind of almost gets this second wind later in his life through this group or this moral force, right? This Oxford group, which later rebrands as Moral Rearmament. And I thought this period was fascinating, Marty. So what do we know about these guys?
Yeah, and before we go to the Oxford group, it's important to understand that Finland had just gone through a brutal civil war. It was not a nice story. Many people suffered. The entire nation suffered. So the let's say the overall ethos of how to rebuild the society and how to rebuild the moral framework for Finland, some of these elements were there already before this Oxford group, because clearly the Oxford group, all that turned out to be moral rearmament, it was not a hobby, but it gave form to the values and the thoughts Heikki had about leadership. So I'm not saying that Heikki invented these things thanks to the Oxford group. I think Heikki had some of these values already before, but a structure and peers were found in the Oxford group, which was a Christian movement built around moral renewal, self-examination, confession, honesty, unselfishness, purity, and love. And later on, the moral rearmament becomes a more political, more anti-totalitarian. The idea that societies need moral strength against Hitler, Stalin, and the collapse of values. And so this whole framework speaks very strongly to Heikki, who Heikki was not a specifically religious person before. That's very important to understand. He was not religious and religiously active before. So, but he was clearly a systems person. He believed in order, responsibility, and duty. And now there is a framework that is easy to adopt. And this means that business is not just about money and return on investment. Labor is not just a force to be exploited. A company is more than just contracts and wages. And leadership is an element of your character. It's a full body sport, should I say, rather than being a utilitarian toolbox of extracting the maximum out of your people. And that can be very powerful because it gives you meaning. It gives you a sense of responsibility for the society, for the workers that you are working together. But it, of course, also creates tensions because in those days, the labor relations were not always easy. The labor unions were strong. There were many people that were bitter from the outcome of the Civil War. There were people who were trying to bargain better position for themselves in order to recoup the lost money and wages due to the recession or all these 20s, early 30s. And in practice, then what Heikki sees is selfishness and all those negative elements. And this, of course, looks like a diversion from the pure values that he saw that we need to foster. And the coming decades definitely were difficult and will come is increasingly difficult as well.
I love this part of the story, and we're not going to dwell on it too much, but listeners, do look at what the Oxford group, which then became Moral Rearmament, then created as legacies, not just in KONE and its culture. The Oxford group Moral Rearmament created Alcoholics Anonymous, particularly powerful in the US, and has obviously saved many lives through alcohol addiction. It also created the seeds for the European Union. Right. And this is a particular prescient time. You know, a lot of these people have just lived through World War I, a civil war. World War II is coming in our timeline, but there's a lot of people trying to still do good in the world and also trying to make sure that effectively people aren't disputing by putting a wrench in the machine of the business or going out on strikes. When I read the history of KONE, I didn't understand quite how many labor disputes were taking place in this kind of 30-40 year period. It felt like every other week was a labor dispute, right? And this tension back and forth between the different elements. So see Heiki's kind of coming to moral rearmament, not as a Christian movement, but very much as a kind of operating system for how he needs to kind of stabilize his country and stabilize his business. I think it's a really powerful story. I'd encourage people to have a look at Oxford Group Moral Rearmament. There's tons there. So, unfortunately, World War II has arrived. Now, the Winter War, as it's known in Finland, begins in November 1939, where Finland is attacked by the Soviet Union, right? And the country fights for survival. And again, this is not an abstract thing. Helsinki is 150 odd kilometers from the Russian border. Yeah. And this war is not abstract for Heikki. It hits the family, the workers. Helsinki is bombed by Molotov's breadbasket. So, this is the origin of a lovely fake news, which is we're not dropping bombs, we're dropping supplies. They just happen to blow up, right? And KONE has to protect its people. It has to move its factory and its operations. And in the middle of all this kind of winter war, sadly, Harold passes on. In 1941, Harold dies. And really, it's another turbulent time for Heikki, right? He's got war, he's lost his father, he's got to move the company. Everything's not necessarily going wrong, but it's all happening all at once.
Yeah. So this is brutal timing, and it's I mean, very quickly after the Winter War was over, there was a period of peace, but then there was a continuation war where Soviet Union attacked it even with more gusto. So in the middle of all this, Heikki needs to assume the full responsibility, and he essentially needs to start running immediately and jumping on a moving train in a way. And this is very critical because if we think of the things, how everyday life was changed in the end of the continuation war, approximately 75% of all national funds, the government budget, 75% went to the warfare. So this was a total war, and just to maintain the defense industrial production during the war meant that everybody was affected. You had people that were going to war to fight in the front, and at the same time you had to have the industrial production ongoing. So it was a total chaos. And of course, when we think what is the outcome, is that gladly we were able to maintain our independence, but that didn't come cheap.
No, it didn't. And look, listeners, I was educated in the UK. You study World War II a lot, but sadly, you never talk about. You talk about France, you talk about Germany, you talk about the Maginot, you talk about all that. You don't talk about the Winter War and the Continuation War. And again, living here in Finland has helped me understand that this was a existential war for Finland. This is Ukraine, Russian invasion like, if not even more so, right? Because it's an even smaller population being basically dominated by an even bigger military. And so I think we have to explain a little bit, Marty, why did Finland have to pay reparations to the Soviet Union? Well, even though the Soviet Union attacked Finland, like this is like having to pay the burglar that broke into your house and nicked your stuff.
Well, this is how shit happens. the first reason why we had to pay, because in this battle against Soviet Union, who was part of Allied nations, together with UK and together with United States, we were still taking the second place, which in the case of a war is a lost position. The second thing is that we have to pay reparations because we could. There were, in the Second World War, there were other parties who also lost the war, but they either didn't have to pay or they didn't pay because they just didn't. And we were either stupid enough or obedient enough or just beaten enough so that in addition of having been beaten already, we continued to pay the reparations, and we also lost land in the peace treaty that was done in Paris. But I don't know. In the end, I think that we were just beaten enough so that we complied and we didn't fight back. And Soviet Union in those days was in a very, very good bargaining position. And we ended up being we ended up paying 300 million gold dollars in war reparations. But rather than coming up with cash, the method of payment was in industrial goods, ships, machines, all kinds of equipment, engines, even clothing, grains, hoists, complex manufactured products. And originally the period of payment was 6 years, but it was later extended. And we, of course, didn't have that industry ready. A lot of the industries during the wartime had been converted into production of defense equipment, arms and weapons. So this was a huge conversion of that defense industrial machine to produce stuff that was in the requested items list that came from Soviet Union. And this is probably the most important pivot point in modern Finnish industrial economic history, because this forced industrialization. And it has, in a way, it's one of those crises that has some positive coming out of it, because the companies that might otherwise be very, very small and modest or just died away are forced to learn production, delivery, quality, and scale. And KONE is pulled directly into this. So there are interesting stories when the Soviet representatives come to the KONE factory, which was in Hakaniemi, in Haapaniemenkatu those days, and explain what they want: freight elevators, electric hoists, heavy cranes, including some cranes that are able to lift more than 50 tons, stuff that was never done before in Finland. So KONE had made some of these cranes, but clearly this was beyond the comfortable capability, and there was not even space in the factory to do that. So eventually the crane production is moved. I think it was 1946 or so, were moved to Hyvinkää, which is something like 50 kilometers north from Helsinki, and they had to commit producing stuff that they haven't produced before. And even if this was, of course, a government arrangement, from the point of view of a private company, there's a huge amount of risk involved with this. Even if there's a government arrangement and the company is supposed to get paid for the stuff and the government pays for the money that is then handed over to Soviet Union, there's a huge economic risk involved with this. To me, this sounds very much like offset deals in defense procurement later on. Let's not get into that too deep, but when I was reading this history, it very much felt like offset deals to some degree. And essentially what happens is that, of course, there's the interesting story about gallows, when the Soviet representatives are demanding something that has never been produced before by KONE. The Heikki and Erik Ingvall, they had these gallows drawings that if you are requesting us to do this, we will be on gallows, and when your superiors in Soviet Union found out about that you were committing into this without the company actually having capability to doing that, you will be on the gallows as well. So it was quite an existential element to it.
Yeah, and listeners, I don't think we can underline this point enough. When I take visitors around Helsinki and I do my little tourist tour and I explain that the capital was in Turku and it moved to Helsinki, and then there was the Winter War, and then there was the Continuation War, and then I explain that Finland has to pay this insane amount of war reparations, everybody's like, why does Finland have to pay? And the sad answer was Finland called for arms, and France and the UK kind of went, sorry, we're busy fighting the Nazis, we have no guns to spare. So Finland had to get the guns from somewhere, and they had to get the guns from basically the only people that would sell them, which was the Germans at the time, right? And this is kind of the enemy of your enemy is your kind of friend. So Finland got the guns, ends up on the wrong side of history. Joe Stalin's too powerful, Treaty of Versailles, and Finland's now on the hook to pay. But if you hadn't had that moment, and it's a terrible moment for Finland, but if you hadn't had this moment, you wouldn't have got this industrialization. This is shifting really from an agricultural economy with some almost industrial startups, right? KONE at this stage is still very much a kind of industrial startup. This is where Finland has to scale. And this is like Heikki doing a training montage now, right? He has to literally speed run an entire industrial process. And Finland has to scale on steroids, mainly because effectively the Soviet Union has put a gun to their head and said, give us the stuff, right? And give us the stuff quickly. Quality doesn't matter at the moment. We're selling into the Soviet Union. It matters that they have cranes. So they suddenly get into this whole new line of business, and they have to do it at a scale that nothing else would have delivered, right, at this particular stage. And they do it super quickly, right? So this is like their, if you're watching a film of Heikki's life, this is the insane training montage part, where basically they have to build, right, just to stand still. And the risk that the company goes through is insane, because at the moment the government's kind of like, you got to do this, we need you to do this, but we can't really support you that much. Oh, and by the way, cash flow is your problem.
Mm-hmm. That's unfortunately what happened. And the thing is that, well, I mean, Heikki in the first place came back from United States to Finland due to his commitment to his home country, and many Finns in those years were actually very, very patriotic and willing to take very unselfish steps to try to rebuild the nation without sparing their own effort. So the situation was very, very positive in that sense. However, since Soviet Union won the war, it meant that also the Soviet sympathizers, the Finnish communists, who were very, very strong, even the let's say the secret police in Finland was very, very left oriented, and the whole society was subjected to the strong influence of Soviet Union. And this means also that when we come to labor situation, labor unions, they were very, very leftish. And the capitalists were seen as something very, very negative, greedy, evil people as such. And the whole reconstruction stage was very, very tough industrially. And the inflation, the pressure on wages, people were trying to get recompensation for the stuff that they had lost. The political tensions, the communist influence in unions, the whole political system had people. I mean, we had political parties those days, still in the 70s, who were declaring that their objective is a revolution in Finland. I mean, they were declaring that they want to have a communist revolution in Finland. So the times were very, very different in those days. Very difficult to even imagine today. And the unions were pushing hard, employers were resisting, and in 1956 there was a huge strike, a general strike that lasted almost 2 months, and KONE was hit directly. Almost 700 workers from the Helsinki and Hyvinkää factory stayed away, and major wage increases had to be accepted, and it's a huge thing. And at the same time, you had the huge pressure from the war reparation agreement and the profitability thereof. I mean, this is the one thing that rarely is remembered. We are talking about privately owned companies, and if there is one thing that everybody needs to understand from a company is that you have to sell with the higher prices that your own costs are. That's how you stay alive, stay afloat. And in this world where the prices had been agreed in the 40s, and you have all these increases in wages, etc., it didn't mean that the money that you get from your deliveries that you are doing on behalf of your government and on behalf of your nation, it doesn't mean that those prices are automatically increasing, even if your cost base is rising up all the time. So, I mean, talking about dire straits, this was really a tough call, and this is the area where Heikki had to lead through. regardless of the pressures from everywhere, inflation, delivery deadlines, the moral conflicts he had, and still trying to stay solvent all through this. That was the task.
Yeah, look, I take my hat off to Heikki during this period. This is so hard, right? The Soviet Union has said, "Hey, those prices from the 1940s, we'll have those." Right? For the stuff that you're basically, the costs in the 1950s are very different. He has labor disputes. He has a workforce that has just fought basically and seen their brothers and family members killed in front of them, right? And now they have to basically build the stuff for the people who won the war, right? This is bad. And obviously, listeners, just remember that moral rearmament. That's kind of almost what gets him through it, right? It's almost a Christian moment in terms of finding something deep himself, an operating system, something that he can do to try and provide things for his workers, to support them and their families, not just because it's the right thing to do, but to help people who are basically war damaged and battered from a conflict also have meaningful lives. Right? And it's kind of good for him and good for the others. But you can just see him during this general strike going, oh my gosh, I've got the government / the Soviet Union telling me that we need these 50-ton cranes. I've got workers out on strike. How can I make this whole thing work? And look, hats off to him. He does it. Him and the company pull through. It is insanely hard. It kind of makes them because it doesn't break them, right? But it's very close at the end. And I know we're kind of skipping a lot of details. There's a huge history lesson here in how KONE survives this particular period, right? But we're kind of coming towards the end of Heikki, and we've got another protagonist to introduce. Yeah? So, Marty, let's talk about Pekka.
Yeah, well, Pekka Axel Herlin was born in 1932. The same year, Heikki eventually became the managing director, so this was already a few years back. And the timing was almost too neat because the father, Heikki, took KONE in crisis. The son was born into crisis, but Pekka is definitely not Heikki 2.0 because Pekka grew up under the shadow of depression, war shortages, a demanding father, and a company that is becoming central to the family's identity. Like all the father and grandfather, Pekka was very strong, impulsive, competitive, sometimes difficult, but as an individual also sensitive and shy. He struggled with speech, reading and writing issues. He was not the polished engineering heir you might expect. I mean, he was not even an engineer because he chose to major economics, and that was clearly a signal to everybody that he will be different. And what's of course very important here is that Pekka is eventually bringing the numbers, cost, investment, organization, scaling the production to the company at a time when these were not the de facto standard. And it's very, very important to realize that even if Heikki was technically extremely capable and industrially durable person, but in the end, KONE was very, very complicated to be led only as an engineering company. I mean, this is the time when most Finnish industrial companies were very engineering driven, because that was the major challenge. The major challenge was to make these things, make miracles happen, and due to the limited amount of competition in the marketplace, you were kind of able to come up with the proper pricing, but it was not supposed to be sustainable in the long term. And KONE has been amongst the Finnish companies one of the trailblazers in developing proper management systems with cost accounting, with capital discipline, with investment logic, the return on investment calculations, and the ambition to go abroad.
Again, listeners, we're gonna move on from the family story in a second into Act 3. But again, if you're kind of wanting to kind of stereotype, like Heiki's the engineer that basically builds the company and survives kind of World War II and its aftermath. And then as we come back to Pekka, Pekka's going to be the kind of the economic growth person who's going to take, this still small company, important, and take it out to the world. But we now need to understand, why is elevators important? Like when Marty originally said, hey, we need to do KONE, I was like, the elevator company? Like, we've just done Maersk, we've just done Roche, we've done ASML. These are really important categories. This is global trade, this is health, this is semiconductors. And it really was a kind of mind shift change for myself when I started digging into the research. This is not a box goes up and down in a building, right? We did Maersk, we did a box going around the world and the standardization of containers. When you think about elevators and how people move, this is one of the great changes in human settlement, right? So it's movement inside the buildings and how it becomes mechanized, safe, continuous, and eventually we just don't even think about it. It's invisible to us. So look, don't get me wrong, cities have existed for a long, long period of time. Paris, Rome, London exists. But cities generally in the old days were governed by the power of the leg, like carrying yourself up the stairs, and the stair was the tax. And it's not so long ago that the upper floors of buildings were actually the cheap floors of buildings, because you had to walk up all the stairs, and how many people wanted to walk up? And also there's the danger of the fire risk, and can you get out in this particular time? So height equals effort. Right, and this is how the elevator changed the city.
Yeah, and it's especially when you look at the big cities with high skyscrapers. In United States, you have places like New York City, and then you have places like Austin, Texas, or Dallas Fort Worth area, there where when the place is geographically on a broad area, you have to have a lot of emphasis on the ground transportation, just to get from one place to another, just to visit another colleague in another place. When you are able to build high buildings, all of a sudden the internal logistics is actually helping you to get to other places very quickly, very rapidly, and you are inventing essentially a very different kind of city where the vertical dimension is taken into full use. And this is a total economic inversion. The technology changes. In addition to the rent map of the building, the whole logic of how a city and building works.
Yeah, I think again, we talked about Otis earlier. It's even further back in the timeline. In 1854, Elisha Otis, at the kind of Crystal Palace, this great exhibition in New York, he demonstrates a safety elevator. He does a bit of a stunt. He stands on a platform. The rope is cut, right? The elevator drops a little. The safety mechanism kicks in, and effectively the crowd goes wild, right? And the story is repeated and repeated and repeated. But just to be clear, the reason why they had to do that is elevators were insanely dangerous, right? People died in elevators. Not saying that the origins of claustrophobia come from elevators, but you just look in the film chronology of how many elevators are risk. There's a shaft, people die, buildings burn. Elevators don't have a good vibe in kind of early Hollywood kind of narrative. Right. And what Otis has to do is really persuade people that these vertical railways, as they're originally known, is all safe. Right. And this actually goes on for a long time. Marty, I was really shocked at, again, elevators deaths in the 1800s. This is a big storyline. This is hundreds of people for many, many years. And actually, it doesn't get any better for quite some time. It's not this safety brake mechanism, because the buildings get taller, the weight of the steel cable gets heavier. Actually, the safety mechanisms often can't cope. And it takes a long time for the industry to basically consolidate around a set of standards that basically save lives.
Yeah, and stuff that we take for granted. Like when the door opens, the elevator is rare is there rather than the empty shaft where somebody can fall into. I mean, those were in the early time of elevators. Those were the ways how people died. So small, and today they may sound very insignificant in the inventions were needed in order to make sure that it works as planned. So the machine needs to evolve. The early passenger elevators were very, very slow, expensive, and tied to a particular power system. Hydraulic elevators were useful in many buildings, but they had their limitations. And all kinds of different technologies were used. And the modern building is really based on the number of inventions that have to happen at the same time. It was really how you build a high skyscraper, how you take care of the fireproofing, electricity, land values, how you get water pressure, the telephones, building codes, and elevators. Because of course, if you are a property developer, elevator sounds like something. It's a waste of space. I mean, you would not want to have them, but on the other hand, you need them. So how do you optimize the use of the elevators to make sure that the logistics, the vertical railway system, works in an optimal way? It's all of a sudden it's in the core or the functional role of the whole elevator system and the whole building.
Yeah, and again, I don't think most of us don't think that much about building design, but effectively the elevator is the kind of spine of the building. You can't once you've put it in, you can't really take it out, right? Because how many shafts do you need? How much rentable floor? How long are people going to wait? How fast can you accelerate them? I hadn't realized that, again, if you accelerate the elevators faster, it actually causes real motion sickness from the people. So it's not so much
Indeed.
how quick you can move these things, it's how quick the people will let you move these things, right? How do you handle the air pressure, the ropes? This is a very technical engineering challenge. And the elevator is not just inside the building, it actually shapes the sort of buildings that we can have.
And the other thing is that even if we don't necessarily, as a visitor or as a resident in a building, we don't think about all these technical details, but we all understand and are bothered if we need to wait for the elevator longer than what we feel is reasonable. Because in the end, when we come to the lobby of a major skyscraper and we have a meeting at the 56th floor, and we are already late because the street traffic has disappointed us. We are very, very anxious. Where's the elevator? When is it coming? Why isn't it already here? So all of a sudden, the actual sentiment of people who are coming to the building on a daily basis or irregularly, they are actually interested in the main service point. That is, how quickly I get to the floor and to the office that I'm going to.
Yeah, and again, listeners, we can't dig too much into the detail because we'll kind of lose you in the engineering side. But elevators are a total marvel. But this isn't just the only thing that KONE does. KONE also, and the big change in society, is also when we look at effectively the escalator and how that actually solves a different problem. So as we're comfortable, elevators moves people in batches, group enters, doors close, cabins move, doors open. Whereas the escalator moves continuously. So there's a chap called Jesse Reno who develops an early moving stair concept in the 1890s. Then Charles Seeberger later develops the step-type escalator and sells the patents and trademarks rights to Otis in 1910. And basically, Otis not just does escalators, it does elevators as well. And again, the use case is totally different. We have now the department store use case, the railway station, the underground system, the shopping centers, the travelators in airports, the exhibition halls and the stadiums. So this is not just about moving a few people between floors. These are continuous people flow. And this is another extension of what KONE gets into.
Yeah, and the escalators are fascinating, not only because they remove a decision where you have to choose to wait, you enter a box. This is like elevator is a batch processing thing. I mean, if we think about production logic, and escalators are one-piece flow, which in many cases, in short distances, is more efficient than batch processing. like all of you manufacturing engineers know very well. And the escalator is really making the movement feeling continuous, and it puts the logic on how to use the escalators, puts to the mind of individual people. So essentially the difference is that where elevators are making vertical real estate valuable and functional, the escalators make a multi-level public space very fluid.
Yeah. And again, think business models for a second. Like when I look at escalators, it's like, well, what is the business model for this? This isn't like a laptop that you replace every few years, right? This changes these things need servicing. They need maintenance. Everybody knows when the things aren't working because it's obvious, right? And so there's not just the safety aspect, there's the business aspect of this. So when KONE and these other companies like Otis are looking at this space, there's legal requirements on servicing, right? But there's also safety and important other requirements. So this shapes the whole business model that we're getting into this space. So it's about inspection, maintenance, emergency call-outs, spare parts, how you modernize something which is critical infrastructure in a facility, how you stay compliant, and how you eventually replace, right? And again, I think, when we start looking at the emergence of these Otis and KONE type companies, this is the kind of business model that kind of underpins this aspect. And I don't think I'd appreciated, Marty, when I started looking at this, is that there's a particular thing that people need to get their heads around with this type of business model. And this is all about the installed base and route density.
Yeah. And indeed, escalators and elevators are being renovated and they are being upgraded. But it's a massive, massive, massive endeavor. So it takes several decades before you make a major rebuild of an elevator. But as we've seen in so many other businesses as well, of course, the great thing is the business model that provides you continuous revenue stream rather than bringing you revenues when you are installing a new machine. And it's very, very critical. I mean, elevator being a great asset in the sense that there is a public perception and public requirements on the inspection and the maintenance and the emergency systems and spare parts and on all that. But it's very, very important that when we talk about service business, I mean, all manufacturing companies are talking about service business since 20, 30 years. The elevator has been a very, very natural product where the servicing part has been essential from the very beginning. I mean, from the time when KONE was established, servicing was part of the offering that the company needs to have.
Yeah, and route density, I think, becomes extremely important because one elevator in a city is a kind of obligation, and 1,000 elevators in a city is a route network, right? And so, again, if you think about it, you're running a business like KONE or Otis. If you've basically got your service team running around the city and the next elevator is 1 block away, fine, right? It's moving 1 block, hopefully not get a parking ticket, service that elevator. If it's 1,000 miles between elevators, right, then suddenly that's a lot of lost time. That's a lot of issues. You're not utilizing your workers effectively. They can only get through so much in a day. So response times will improve if you have a dense network. Now, I said it earlier, right? Helsinki is not known for its sky rises, right? So, there isn't much route density here. But effectively, this is a really important thing. So again, the modern city grows, ironically, because it's easier to service these things in close proximity to each other. So the modern city attracts people, and because the people are there, it attracts more people, and because the people are there, you then create the infrastructure to attract more people, right? So it's kind of almost like a power law of kind of city control and creation. And really, again, one of the other things that I had to get my head around when I looked at this was that the buildings outlast the technology inside them. Right, Marty said that this is one of the big problems with this business is the apartment building that you place an elevator in may stand for between 80 to 100 years, right? but the elevator and the escalators don't last that long, and actually servicing them inside the building and renovating inside the building is also part of the job. That's part of the kind of lifetime value of that particular opportunity.
Yeah, and I mean, I think when we think about houses and buildings, we see them very often as some kind of fixed assets, which unfortunately they are not. I mean, in order to maintain a building, it's like maintaining a car or a boat or an aircraft. You have to calculate a number of maintenance, repair, and overhaul activities, including upgrades, that you have to calculate to be part of it over the life cycle of the asset. So it's the building doesn't sustain itself by being left alone any more than your cattle can survive without the personnel taking care of them. So building is maybe lasting a little bit longer than cattle, but a building needs continued upkeeping in order to stay effective and to serve the purpose that they have. So it's the same, all the systems, including the elevator, that you have to have the service there. And knowing this, I mean, when I was recently living in DC, I was living in a 10-story building in the top floor, and when a couple of times I had to come with the groceries and climb those 10 floors with the grocery bags, you knew that you were doing something very, very strenuous. Glad to say that in that particular building, KONE was the one who renovated the entire elevator system. So now the people there are in a great situation. But it's turning this continuous upkeeping into a business model has been one of the core inventions that KONE has been successful in.
Yeah. So again, I think we've gone wide, and we now need to kind of return to the family. And again, if you think about this, listeners, the installed base of elevators really creates the business. The route density creates the advantage. If you have route density, you can effectively grow your business. You can have economies of scale. The building creates the recurring revenue, right? Because the people have to keep moving up and down. That's it. So when we come back to KONE, right, we're coming into Act 4 now, right? It's no longer Heiki's problem was, can we build a trusted machine at scale, right? Now the challenge is for Pekka, this third generation, of this particular family, who's going to take on this particular company and this particular problem. Pekka's kind of got a different problem on his hands, right? He's got the capital problem, the scale problem, acquisition problems, right? He's got to do internationalization. He's got to decide on cranes, elevators, or anything else. And he's got to do it profitably. So he's inheriting a very, very different business. And ironically, he gets dragged into this company because actually what he wants to do is be a farmer.
Yeah, and gladly we have Torsvik, which is the farm, the manor that the grandfather had already bought, and that's where he wanted to be. That's the third generation that is strongly rooted into the land and into the farm. So that's where Pekka lived at the time, and he was not sitting there to wait to take over KONE as a corporate prince. He was there, and of course what we missed here is one element of Torsvik, one part of the let's say the peace treaty we had to lease the area of Porkkala to Soviet Union for 50 years, which fortunately ended up being only 11 years. But the point is that the Torsvik manor and the whole farm was lost for 11 years when the Soviets occupied the area. And Pekka was in the position that he went back to Torsvik after Porkkala area had been returned, and there was a lot of reparation work in order to rebuild the whole thing that had not been kept with the same let's say commitment that the Hedelin family always had. So he was there. It was not a gentleman hobby. It was hard work, and and Pekka wanted to be a farmer.
Yeah, and I think there's a kind of history rhymes or repeats itself. Like Heikki is drawn to the land but pulled into the machine being KONE. Pekka is drawn to the land and pulled into the machine that is KONE, and Antti, and we'll get to him later, is drawn to the land and pulled into the machine. And Thorsvik is there. It's a different. It's their kind of happy place, as it were. It's the soil, it's the animals, it's the seasons, it's physical, it's independence. It is literally raking the muck and looking after the animals. But KONE as a machine keeps calling them back. And I think there was a lovely part in this, Marty. Thorsvik is given over to the Soviet Union as part of war reparations. The family effectively loses its happy place. And, I read that piece where Heikki's literally sitting in the farm, writing a letter to the Soviet Union, to the Russians that will take it over, telling them how to maintain the heating system so that it doesn't get too cold in the winter. Right? It's a 50-year lease. He doesn't think he'll get it back in his lifetime. He may or may not get it back in his son's life. Lease is probably too kind a word. It's a 50-year confiscation. Yeah. There's no lease payment. And I love the fact that he's writing the letter like all good house owners when they're kind of passing on the responsibility to the next person. You've left a bottle of wine in the fridge and a note on how the heating system works. Sadly, when he gets back, and it's a relatively short time, as you said, the farm's not quite in the same state as occupied. The doors are blown off, the fields are trashed, there's snow in the hole, the heating system has died, etc., etc. But again, I think that this opens things nicely for Pekka because he's not Heikki's natural clone, right? He's not an engineer. He is different. He's quite a physical, competitive sailor, impulsive young man. He doesn't find studies easy. He's definitely not the polished engineering heir, as you said. And again, I think when Pekka looks at KONE, he doesn't just see machines. He almost sees capital tied up in machines, right? This is the person looking at a warehouse and not seeing effectively the stuff in the warehouse. This is seeing unutilized stacks of cash, right? That isn't kind of working for him. And actually by the late 1950s, kind of KONE needs Pekka. Right? They kind of, if Heikki's the peacetime CEO because he's dealing in wartime, Pekka comes into a company that either needs to grow and it either needs to kill or be killed. Right? That's a real challenge for KONE as we go into this 1950s.
Yeah, it's true. And I think the whole idea that you need to take a look at the business side of things, not just the engineering side of things. It makes sense, and it's very much in line with what's happening in the society also broadly in those days. And it's clear that KONE has demonstrated the technical credibility of building the industrial investment goods. But another thing which is very critical is that it has been very, very domestic or regional at best. There were still many, many, many elevator and escalator manufacturers in the world. So there was clearly some rationalization of the global industrial base that was very, very timely. That had to be done by somebody. And taking the business point of view, studying business at the time when it was not on everybody's lips. He's essentially taking a business degree at a time when international business relations is not the most popular subject in universities. So he was a trailblazer in a way. And just to make it a successful business is what Pekka is seeing ahead of him. And what it means is that you have to start running it like an international industrial organization. And it's the inevitable thing. Are your incomes more than your costs? And do you have cash in your bank account? This is what you need to do. And what is interesting is that that the family all of a sudden starts understanding the whole story in a different way. And there was an interesting story about the consultants being called from Rastor, a very reputable organization, to analyze the company and its organization. And their conclusion essentially was that KONE needs more business management, more operating discipline, and a modernized operational structure. And this is the moment when Pekka is taken from his comfort zone in Torsvik and dragged to the company.
Yeah, and again, look, listeners, Pekka helps rebuild the farm, basically takes it over restarts the farm because it's kind of been totally demolished by the Soviet Union. Half the buildings have kind of gone. The fields are, barbed wire trench mess. And in 1958, Pekka becomes administrative director of KONE, right? So basically, he is very focused on making this now a financial nerve center of the business. So this is about cost accounting and investment planning and budgeting and financial control. And this is what KONE needs, right? And again, it's not that they weren't winning orders. It's just that they weren't developing huge profits at this time, right? And so with Pekka, he's with his economics perspective, not necessarily his people skills, right? But his economics perspective and his wires for business and his interest in statistics. And he has a small peer group that help him shape a business strategy. Whereas Martin said, where this didn't happen that often, right? He starts to basically understand the revenue, the orders. He brings in a new and very valuable lens for how this company now starts to change, right? So elevators and cranes become clearer operating units, right? The coordination between the two factories wasn't happening, and he kind of brings that in. Heikki remains the managing director at this stage in the late 50s, but practical power begins to move towards Pekka. Okay. And then in 1964, right, he's been in for a while now, right? He's done 6 years on the clock. The transition becomes formal and Pekka becomes the CEO. Heikki moves to chairman, and the economics generation is starting to change.
Yeah. And that's when the character of the entire company is changing. Whereas, I mean, if Heikki and his father Harald had been able to establish a durable company that has been able to endure the hardships over the surrounding society, under Pekka, the company becomes ambitious. It doesn't always mean that it's the most elegant way or comfortable way or of progressing things, but Pekka clearly sees that either you eat or you will be eaten. Because this is the key element here is that you end up seeing that the international competition is either drawing you to be the company that will be acquired, or you will grow in order to be significant enough to be a significant player. And this is fundamentally true, especially when Finland, for most businesses, is just too small of a market to be at all interesting without you having an international arm.
Yeah, and I think this is a classic. Again, listeners, if you're looking for a kind of modern kind of analogy, think about the Uber versus Lyft fight of the kind of the 2000s. Like, can you win the city? Can you grow bigger than the other guy? Right? Can you raise capital? Can you get route density? Can you get driver times down? This is Pekka's challenge, right? Can he grow? Right? And his first real serious test as CEO is not just to try and sell a few lifts into another country, but basically get that route density down. And that means he has to basically go to bat against some pretty heavyweight Scandinavian players. So, Marty, give them their full. Who is the Wallenbergs? Who are these people that most listeners in America and UK probably sadly haven't heard of?
Yeah, well, Marcus Wallenberg is not just another businessman. He represents the Wallenberg family, the Wallenberg sphere, the deepest layer of Swedish industrial capitalism, banking, investing, engineering companies, export industry, long relationships with the Swedish state and global markets. I mean, definitely the Wallenberg family has been very, very close to the government of Sweden all these years. There was Kurt Nicolin, who is the CEO of ASEA, another massively important Swedish electrical engineering group. And then on top of that, of course, we had, when we get to the late 50s, in Finland and in the Finnish political environment, we had the president of Finland from 1956, Urho Kekkonen, who, in addition of being a political operator, was always very active also in promoting the ambitions of the business life. And this is very important when we think about everything that happened since 1956. Part of that was due to the continued bilateral trade with Soviet Union, even after the reparations were done, where the government-to-government relationship was important, but at the same time also in the promotion of the industrial elements of Finland, they were seen critical for the future economic growth of Finland. And that's why the president, who in those days had a massive amount of personal influence and power in the Finnish political system, was a central figure in making these things happen. So Pekka was inside this triangle of Finnish ambition, Swedish industrial power, and then the presidential politics. So, I mean, in a way, I mean, Finland was in the late 50s and in the 60s was definitely a geopolitical player of highest degree.
Yeah, and look, on this one, I think Pekka really steps up, because what he wants to do, and he's going up against, these are heavyweights, right? In Marcus Wallenberg and Kurt Nicolin. Like, he wants to basically grab their elevator group from them, right? And run it for himself, and ultimately not be bossed around by the Swedes, and come out ahead.
Yes.
This is ballsy. This really is.
It is. And and it's there's a funny story in the KONE history book about when Wallenberg is coming to Torsvik. They are coming with their own boat. I mean, they are driving with the boat from Sweden, and then they moor the boat to the pier at Torsvik. Then they have dinner, and after the dinner, the Wallenbergs, the wives were there as well. They are going back with their own boats. So I mean, this is kind of
this is nice arriving in your super yacht type, type play.
Indeed, but it's clear everything is based on the whole idea that Pekka understands that you need to grow, and either you will eat or you will be eaten. I mean, it's not that complex. The gutsy thing to do here is to just see where you are and start taking the actions. And it's in the whole KONE story, I think one of the key core elements that continues is that when there's been time to take action, the leaders of different generations have stepped up and done the things that for many others might have seemed impossible. And clear, what happens here is that Pekka sees that, okay, he cannot do this alone. He needs to have the support from the president, and it's crazy. I mean, he was able to have, thanks to the support from the president, he was able to pull this through. And essentially, I mean, KONE buys 49% of ASEA's elevator division, and ASEA receives 30% of KONE's shares. And so it's a very traditional business transaction that takes place.
Yeah, and I love the fact that he uses Kekkonen, like this president / dictator, because he's in power for so long, right? I think most Finns at this point in time don't realize that there is another president. He used this nuclear reactor that Finland is trying to basically get built at some point, and he kind of waves that as the carrot, right, to basically get this deal done. Right, and he's like, "Hey, Kekkonen's coming to the dinner, but let's try and arrange our meeting beforehand. You've arrived very kindly from the boat, and let's do this deal." And again, I think it's a very important move that Pekka gets route density. He expands. He has to give a bit of the company up to do it, but he has a financial structure where he can basically buy it back if he does well. So he risks a large amount to gain a large amount.
Yeah, and I mean, the other thing is that in ASEA's strategy, the elevator business was not doing great. It was not seen as a future focus area for ASEA, and whereas the nuclear power was something that was clearly seen as the strategic direction for ASEA. So, I mean, fundamental strategic choices means that ASEA's elevator business was available for divestment.
Yeah, and again, I think what happens now is that Pekka has to basically now make things work because he's bet a lot and he needs to get a lot. And Sweden, expanding into Sweden, basically showing them their modern methods, improving route density. It's not just internationalization. He has to do the integration piece, right? I've met tons of companies that have bought some other business or acquired a stake in other business, and then all it's done is the press release, and these businesses just keep going as they were previously managed. And I think this ASEA part is where Pekka learns the model of how to integrate, how to develop local routes, how to manage regulations, how to deal with local technicians. And ultimately, I think he must have got a big confidence boost from sitting alongside these kind of major heavyweights and negotiating this very large deal. Yeah. And I think once Pekka has kind of done that in the Nordics, he actually then has the confidence and the kind of he's done the reps to do an even bigger deal. And that's Westinghouse.
Yeah, but before we go to Westinghouse, one thing that I'd like to add, if I may, the key was that because there was exchange of share and Pekka had the call option for those shares that went to ASEA, I think Pekka understood very early on that if those shares are in the hands of ASEA, sooner or later they will come back haunting, because if your shares are somewhere in the hands of other industrial players, sooner or later somebody will try to take over more ownership in KONE. So having a profitable business, turning around the ASEA company to be profitable, and in order to make enough money in order to buy back the shares, was really, it was a must-win battle, even if that specific combination of words was not probably used those days, but it was a must-win battle for Pekka.
Well, I love the stories of where the Swedish people at the board is telling Pekka what to do, and Pekka's just completely ignoring them.
Yes.
And just doing what's best for the business on the basis that if I'm profitable, you'll kind of go away.
Yes.
Right? I love that bit. I thought that was really funny. So then
let's get to Westinghouse now.
Yeah, let's do Westinghouse. So look, in the mid 1970s, and Westinghouse is a big name, everybody knows it, right? But Westinghouse in the 1970s isn't doing very well. Right. And so don't think about this as kind of American juggernaut. This is a very big business that isn't being particularly well managed. So in this case, KONE gets the opportunity to acquire Westinghouse's elevator business, their France and Belgium division. And if the Swedish deal with ASEA was kind of a risk the company move, this is another risk the company move, right? Because it plugs the gap in KONE's European network. It places them in the heart of the European common market. We're in the 1970s. EU is kind of, becoming, right? And effectively it gives him the route density if he can make it work.
Yeah, and this is a dangerous move, whereas Finland and Sweden are, after all, very close to each other, both from the mental side, from the values, from the basic roles of government versus companies. But going to Belgium and France, it's a all different ballgame. The timing for this activity was very, very bad because construction business was in bad shape. Financial markets were not favorable. The French operation was loss-making, and the whole reason why Westinghouse wanted to divest this was because they were losing money. So for Pekka to take this action, it was all about him believing that KONE can turn around difficult assets. And with all fairness, there was evidence. Since 1960s, KONE had bought several companies, and many of them were weak at the time of acquisition, and most of them were turned out profitable. But Westinghouse is bigger and therefore harder, and also politically sensitive due to the nature of employment relations and the government relations in countries like Belgium and France.
Yeah,
and of course, if people didn't know about KONE, but going to those countries in the role of an owner I mean, I don't think that any Nordic companies had a huge amount of respect in places like France those days.
No, and again, I think almost this is a classic example where the successes outweigh the losses. Not everything that Pekka does during this period is golden, right? Like, so he does do Westinghouse and he makes a good go of it. But then there's acquisitions in Spain and other places, and Italy has its own set of problems which aren't so good. It's not all up and to the right on this particular basis. And again, Westinghouse has done the same themselves. They've acquired in Spain and it's gone horribly wrong. There's lots of problems in this particular area. But I think we've set a kind of theme in motion, right? So Pekka is a concentrated owner in KONE, right? This is, to me, when I was reading this, I'm feeling Leonardo da Vecchio back from our Essilor Luxottica kind of episode. Pekka is the force, he sets the direction, and then the management basically kind of fulfills the direction that he has set. And this feels different to the kind of Heikki area, where Heikki is kind of the managing director and CEO and operational of the business. Pekka's doing something else during this period.
Yeah, and I mean, you need to do that. I mean, you cannot expect to be able to run an Italian business operation entirely from Finland. I mean, it's ridiculous. You need to know the local. I mean, even if there's consolidation, but still the decision that a building constructor makes on the supplier of the elevator, the local authorities, the local building codes, the local safety requirements, etc., they need some boots on the ground in the country where you are operating. So the idea that Pekka is trusting the local leadership of the subsidiaries makes a whole lot of sense, because that was the way to work in this time and place.
Yeah, and like all strategies, you'll have some wins and you'll have some losses. I love the story around the Italian finance scandal. It's later in the timeline, but it kind of happens at this point.
Yeah, it does.
So, so just listeners on this one, this is a little bit Hollywood, right? But we'll just include it very briefly. So effectively, at one point, the Italian subsidiary of KONE basically starts cooking the books, right? And they're declaring profits that effectively that they're just not there. This is just financial accounting. The whole management team basically is kind of in on it. There is a whistleblower that alerts the managers. The KONE headquarters are a bit kind of thinking that this is too good to be true. And then they do this kind of Hollywood sting operation, right? Where effectively they fly the managers of the Italian subsidiary to have a budget meeting in Brussels, and in the same time, basically a KONE kind of SWAT team is going into the Italian offices to raid them to basically take their books back. So look, this is growth has its problems, right? If you don't move fast, right, you'll get eaten. But if you do move fast, not everything's going to be perfect. So we can't present this period of the KONE history as perfect, but what they do is they move fast.
Yeah, and that's. I mean, this makes all sense. The whole thing here is that when you think about the growth of the elevator business, you need to be able to standardize, you need to be able to rationalize your offering, you need to centralize some of the elements in order to make money. You cannot make individual elevators to every single market. You need to be able to bring some economies of scale in order to justify why you want to build larger and bigger conglomerates. I mean, the economies of scale are not coming automatically. They come from synergies that you are able to exploit for the benefit of the company. So the question is, what is the company? What is the logic of the company? Is it material flow? Is it a people flow company? What is it? When you are growing the company and you are deciding what acquisitions to make and what not, these are the questions that you need to address and find logical answers to.
Yeah, by the 1980s, KONE is broad, right? The elevators are a central part of what they do. Cranes Remember back to Heikki, Soviet Union, and the gallows humors. Cranes are a second pillar, but there are other units too. There is hydraulics, there's pipe systems, there's ship cargo handling technology, there's medical instruments. There's a lot, right? There is a logic to this, right? And it sits around machine. Remember, KONE means machine, movement and materials, but the group is becoming very broad and heterogeneous, right? It means there's no single clean category story anymore, right? And again, that's not just a problem for Martien and myself, telling the story of a category leader, but it's a problem for how you organize it. And by the late 1980s, Pekka's no longer a young economist dragged from the farm. He is this dominant Finnish industrialist. He is strong. He is difficult. Part of his strength is him being difficult. Yeah, think Musk, right? Musk isn't an easygoing guy, but, demands excellence and gets stuff done, right? And he's taken the company from a domestic machine builder to an international group. But the problem now, as we come into this 80s and 90s, is no longer only the problem around how you grow the corporate, it's the problem of the family.
Yeah, and I mean, there are 4 aspects to Pekka's life. One is KONE, absolutely. The second aspect is the family. The third aspect is the farm, the Torsvik Manor. And the fourth is sailing. And he's equally passionate on all these 4 fronts, but somewhat different way. And there's you can all read from the various aspects of what kind of a father he must have been and how did he behave when he was at home. Complex stories. The main thing is that he was passionate in his own way on all these 4 fronts. But the question is that when you think about succession, what happens after you get tired or your priorities shift? And that wasn't an easy case, because Pekka had been able to grow and build a serious company, but the family relationships were not that easy. It's good to remember that all his predecessors, the grandfather and father, they essentially left the entire estate to one of the children. So how the succession question will be solved when Pekka is stepping aside is a big question.
Yeah, and look, he is we don't want to paint Pekka as a hero or a villain or anything like that. Like, he's dominant, there's no question about that. He's also volatile, that comes through in the research. Sadly, he drinks too much, and he mustn't have been an easy person to get along with. We've heard from various sources again that he kind of speaks in full sentences, is quite difficult to understand. There's no gray, there's a lot of black and white, and there's a lot of speed in what he's doing. So the challenge is that succession quickly becomes a big issue, right? Because Pekka's health, the alcohol is taking its toll. Pekka's health is not so good these days. And really the question is who wants to inherit this business from his children? And at the moment when Pekka's looking around his family, the answer is kind of no one. Right? There's various children. There's Hannah, who is drawn towards more culture and the KONE Foundation. Ilona, moving more to academia. Niklas is interested in journalism. Ilkka is intellectually interested in the business, but again, Pekka's difficult to work with. And then of the 5 children, we have Antti, who is, no spoiler alert coming, he's the farmer.
Yes, and Antti definitely built his life around land, cattle, and agricultural work. He studied that extensively. He grew a lot of cattle. I mean, the farm is still selling Torsvik beef on selected days. So I mean, that has been a very, very critical element. I mean, both Niklas and Ilkka had been involved with the company in form or another, and some sources say that Niklas was at some point was the heir apparent, but then things turn out to be a very different way. And this is the strategic and complex situation that didn't go very well and nicely, because the company was big. The official story says that the company was too complex for the next generation to manage and handle. There's a governance problem under this whole thing, and at the same time, because still the consolidation of the business, I mean elevators and escalators and cranes globally, the consolidation process was still not done. So the question still, are you going to be the eater or are you going to be eaten is definitely there all the time. And what happens essentially that in 1987, due to various reasons, Pekka steps down from the CEO role, but because the next generation was not, let's say, ready or available, the guy who had been in lead of the elevator business for a long time, Matti Matinpalo, becomes the CEO. And on paper that makes sense. I mean, the guy is very, very capable and insightful in that. But of course, the succession doesn't become simple because Pekka is still there. I mean, when Matinpalo was running the elevator business, he was able to move very, very freely within this, let's say, within the sphere of responsibility. But when Matinpalo becomes the CEO, the chairman is all over him every single day. And that becomes a very, very difficult owner-chairman/CEO relationship. And that doesn't turn out well. I mean, in 1988, a year later, Matinpalo suffers a serious stroke and the company is forced to find another operating leader. And at this point, Gerhard Wendt, who had been in charge of the crane business, takes over the CEO role. Somebody who knows the group very well, especially the crane and the industrial side. And indeed, I mean, even if Gerhard Wendt is originally not from Finland, but had been working for KONE for a long period of time, which is an interesting element because KONE is one of those first Finnish companies where somebody from a foreign country has stayed working in the group for decades. And therefore being able to gain important leadership roles. I mean, in those days, this was not automatic either yet. But the point is that under Wendt, the KONE is still a broad industrial company Pekka had built, and all the elevators, cranes, and other businesses are there. But the strategic pressure to do something is building slowly but surely. And there's an interesting steps that we will talk about in a few moments. But before we get to that, there is the story with Thyssen.
Yeah, and look, you can't help but read this and feel sorry for Pekka, even though it's kind of problems at this stage of probably his own making, which is that he gets into a mental state, it sounds like, where he effectively thinks the only way out is to sell the company. Right, and Thyssen is not just another elevator company. It's a German industrial giant, and its elevator arm wants to strengthen its position. It wants route density. KONE offers route density. Right, this is the eat or be eaten type thing. If you're not big enough to basically grow, you will get acquired on this side. And look, I think there's a number of stories where Pekka's kind of very much isolated, very much alone with this problem. He looks at his children, and whether they're willing or available or some mixture of those, it's complicated. These things always are. And he gets to the point where effectively he thinks the best option is to sell the company, right? And effectively sell it to these guys. There is a sale process, but Pekka offers and the children get involved. Ilkka and Nicholas get involved in terms of basically selling. They wanted a complicated structure. The German conglomerate doesn't want a complicated structure. The negotiations move quickly to the spring 1994. Different accounts vary, whether the board is sidelined or the CEO is sidelined, it's not clear. But effectively, it really comes down to Pekka signing the final document or not.
Yeah. And I had the great pleasure a few weeks back to talk with the Professor Kalle Mikkelsen, who wrote the history book of KONE. And he interviewed Pekka Herlin about this whole thing. And what Pekka told Professor Mikkelsen was that he was looking at the papers. And then he started thinking, what are we going to do with all this money that we will receive? Well, the money obviously needs to be invested into something. And Pekka said that he has this governing principle that he should only invest money into businesses he understands. And the only business he really thinks he understands is the business where KONE is in. So once the company is sold, all the proceedings from that divestment should be invested into a company that is in the same business as KONE. So it doesn't make any sense to sell and reinvest into something that is essentially something that he owns already. And then he decides that, okay, not going to sign this.
Look, this, to me, when I read that chapter, this is very much that Mark Zuckerberg moment where he's offered by Yahoo like $1 billion to basically buy Facebook. And like all the investors, the early stage investors, the executive team are like, we should sell $1 billion, a lot of money. Mark's like, well, if I have $1 billion, the only thing I want to do is build the next Facebook. So why would I take $1 billion to build the next Facebook when I already have the Facebook, right? And also, this is Leonardo da Vecchio, right, who never diversifies. Like, he doesn't buy the football team. He does hardly any work outside SLR Luxottica because that's the only business he knows.
Yeah,
right?
Very much the same.
It's very much that moment. Okay, so Pekka pulls back, cancels the sale, but he still has the same problem.
Yeah,
right?
And
like
how to handle the succession, what's going to be the inheritance for the children. So all this remains unsolved, and at the same time, people in KONE and all the other stakeholders, they know that serious sale negotiations have taken place. So what does it mean? Is the company still for sale for somebody else? Who are the potential buyers? What will happen after the new potential buyers perhaps can close the deal? So this uncertainty is actually making things more difficult.
Yeah. Now look, I think this is a real problem, right? You've not got a solution, but now everybody knows that you're up for sale.
Yeah, and by this time, it's been clear. It's become obvious due to the practical daily negotiations and all this. It has become clear that of all the children, none of them are actually overly enthusiastic of taking the responsibility of clearing this situation, to put it very politely. And eventually the task falls to Antti, who has more or less stayed in the background for a long period of time, and he's not the obvious heir, but Antti steps up and delivers the message: KONE is not for sale. The company will remain independent, and it will go actively toward new markets. And this is a huge moment in the history, a real pivot point, and not the person that the people around, the stakeholders, were expecting him to be the voice of ownership. And all of a sudden, he's the one who delivers the message. And then we eventually get into the Act 5, the story of Antti Herling.
Yeah, and listeners, if you want to get an understanding of Antti's personality, he wants to be a farmer, right? But he also wants the responsibility of running the farm his way. So earlier on in his life, he goes to Pekka and say, okay, I want Forsvik, I want the farm. And Pekka's like, sure, you can have the farm, but I'm still owning it, and I still have responsibility for it. And Antti's like, do you know what? I'm going to go and get another farm. And he does this. He goes off to the west coast of Finland with his wife, and he runs another farm for 8 years, right? Because Pekka won't give him effectively the control, and he knows he'll just get basically, nice possible way, kind of bullied around a little bit. So he wants this ownership. And I think that's a really nice story from his personality that, yeah, like he'll take the he'll take the ownership, but only if he actually has the responsibility that goes with it.
And in this, he is not that different from the father, grandfather, or great grandfather, who all understood that they actually don't want to be just the handyman of the previous generation. They want to be They want to be in control and run the operation like they see fit.
Exactly. So we're going to move off the kind of, Hollywood drama in a bit, everybody, but we just have one little bit act. In the beginning of Act 5, in 1995, Becker makes the decision to basically have for want of a better word, secret will. Right? Him and his wife, Kirsty, revoke their earlier equal inheritance and they create a new one. The voting A shares, remember, KONE has A shares and B shares. The A shares have like 10 times the voting power of the B shares. The A shares go to Antti. Right? And then, oh my gosh, when I was reading this, I couldn't believe it. He does something very Becker and he swears Antti to secrecy and basically makes him promise that effectively not to tell anybody about the secret will. Right, which obviously is kind of not, it's there's not much universe karma going to come from this particular moment, but effectively Antti moves forward as the kind of heir apparent, yeah, and everything's relatively stable until that breaks a few years later, and then really what's happening now is that effectively Antti is stepping into the business. Right, so the secret will is the kind of the Hollywood part of this, but what really is happening is Antti is starting to own more of KONE, not just the shares, but actually the operations of the company. But they still need to make some decisions. So in KONE Cranes, the kind of crane operating part of KONE is separated in 1994. They go looking for a buyer, and they basically move that buyer and basically halve off that part of the business. So they're focusing more on the elevator side, and they're kind of moving in that particular direction. And then Marty, in 2002, KONE moves on Partech. So just explain the Partech episode. And I probably mispronounced it.
No, you didn't. Partech it was a very, first of all, strong government ownership and a large industrial company, essentially a department store of engineering goods, and that company was available for sale, and of course there were many potential buyers. In 2002 it eventually gets bought. The previous talks about focus is immediately slashed by buying this company that is involved with all kinds of stuff: cargo handling, tractors, forestry machines, mineral installation, anything you can imagine. And so it goes to the wrong direction in the sense, and the markets hate this. The price of the shares go down, and everybody's asking that why a focused elevator and escalator company is getting involved with this multi-industry group, and it's a mess. On the other hand, the good side of the story is that if you analyze the ownership side of the whole thing rather than the industrial synergies, you can actually find that there are areas that definitely have potential to grow, and there are areas that should be divested, and there will be divestments. So a lot of the parts are divested, and eventually what remains of Partech in the assets that remain, which is mainly cargo handling, material handling side, that then is reformed to form a company that is called Cargotec. And that's in a way what helps here, because what it means also is that in this family affair of ownerships, the control over KONE goes to Antti, but then the siblings, in addition of getting shares of KONE, non-voting shares, so I mean all the siblings have shares, but the Cargotec, the other siblings like Ilkka is getting more role and control over the Cargotec side of ownership. So this is a very, very complex arrangement of ownerships and assets, but turns out to be actually quite clever. The sad thing is that with the request of staying quiet in the first place, Pekka put Antti between a rock and a hard place.
It's an unwinnable position. Yeah.
And I mean, he essentially had to break the promise he made to the siblings, and it must have been terribly difficult to arrange this whole thing in their mind. But here, after this complex solution, I think there's a some level of truth apparently was able to be made with these moves.
Yeah, look, if I was a Finnish analyst studying KONE at this point, I have no idea what's going on. Right? The company's up for sale. No, it's not. Then we need to diversify. So we need to get rid of all the stuff that isn't important to us. KONE cranes get sold, and we're going to streamline on elevators. And then the next minute, we're buying a load of stuff, tractors, bunch of other stuff that doesn't relate. Maybe Antti wants to buy tractors because he likes farms, right? It's just confusing, right? Obviously, that's the external perspective, and it must have been very confusing. But what's really happening here, Marty, and I think you nailed on this, is that this is Antti kind of laying the ground to basically give his siblings basically responsibilities of their own businesses, right? While effectively understanding that KONE now in this kind of streamed down elevator form needs to be inherited by his line, right? It's a little bit of a pruning of the tree, unfortunately. And there's not a nice way to do this. And I don't think he's in any position that gets him looking like a saint or looking like anything. He's in an unwinnable position. He's just trying to do the best of a bad job.
Yeah, and I mean, if we think about the succession, there are a lot of, let's say, pressures and challenges between the individuals. But on the other hand, I don't know if it is making it any easier, but both Cargotec, which has now been split into two, it's two separate companies today, publicly listed both, and the KONE, they all have made very well, which means that the value of the shares held by all the siblings have gone up as a result of all these changes. Well, I'm not saying that this justifies the actions. I'm not saying that at all. All I'm saying is that from the business perspective, the story in retrospect looks logical and even wise. But at a personal level, it has cost a lot of personal relationships in the family. So it has definitely been very, very painful.
So let's now move on from the kind of family drama. Well, let's kind of put a close on that. Let's talk about China, right? Because China, if there's one wave in, if there's a wave of kind of building high-rise, high-density route places in the world that you want to get to, if you're KONE and you're surfing in this particular ocean, this is the wave that you want to catch. And KONE, under Antti's now part of the business. He has this extraordinary CEO that gets a lot of plaudits, and Marty, you can pronounce his name better than I can. So Matti basically ends up really moving KONE into China. Tell us about this story.
Well, I mean, it's clear that when after the turn of the millennium, it's clear that the whole Chinese growth has reached a point where China has become a huge market, fast-growing market, extremely fast-growing market. But at the same time, what is important about China is that China at the same time has become the manufacturing powerhouse, which, for example, I remember from a meeting I had with some KONE people in, I think it was 2006 or 7, sometime those days. At that time, it was something like 98% of the escalators were actually produced in China. So in addition of having a huge market, you have a massive subcontracting base, which of course today everybody knows that, everybody understands that, but 20 years ago it was not so clear to everybody. Yes, we knew that a lot of low-cost products were produced in China 25, 30 years ago, but the fact that you can produce first-class industrial engineering products in China, that was not so obvious 25 years ago. But under the leadership of Matti Alahuhta, those changes were made, and and at the same time, what happened is that KONE is building a more customer-oriented global operating model, which thanks to Matti Alahuhta's time when he had been working for Nokia Corporation. He was exactly the right person, and already those days, Matti Alahuhta was one of the most respected industrial leaders in country. So this is a real pivot point. What happens, and what is interesting here is that Antti was never the CEO of the company. So I mean, he, rather than being involved with KONE's operational business, he immediately took the owners and the chairman's position, which is different than what happened with his father and grandfather and great grandfather.
Yeah, and listeners, we haven't really given KONE its fair share of its inventions and innovations. They've done a tremendous amount. In the mid 1990s, they introduced the monospace, and they basically built that around the compact eco disc hoisting machine. Like KONE is an R&D, leader in many ways, right? The monodisc ecodisc, it removes the machine room, right, which is again gives a huge amount of usable space back to architects, developers, and owners. I love the fact that KONE is one of the first people to kind of build an elevator testing rig in a mine shaft in a forest. Like there's so much that Marty and I could have talked about and really fulfilled our engineering practices in KONE, because they are an engineering leader, and that's been covered in other videos on them. So we've tried to very much talk the story of the family and the story of the kind of the city in this episode. But I think, really there's a great story of engineering leadership and product competitiveness. Right. So, KONE has done an amazing job, not just to have route density, but to very much grow effectively on an engineering and a technical basis. They've very much been a category leader on the technology as much as any other areas. And really, Marty, you've got the numbers there. After 2008, okay, KONE's numbers really start to go big.
Yeah, and this is, of course, a pivotal year, because that's the year of financial crisis, and the Western markets slow down. However, thanks to building the business to China, KONE as a company continues to grow. By 2010, the company turns 100 years old, with revenue rising to almost 5 billion and EBIT of 14% of sales. Cash flows rising to 857 million from a little bit more than 500 million 5 years earlier. So the timing for the entry to China, or rather we should say growing the presence in China, was timed perfectly, and that just proves the let's say the partnership between Antti and Matti working extremely well. And
yeah, I think there, Marty, I love this bit, because effectively you have this stable owner, you have a professional manager, right? You start to have a focus category, and you start to operate at scale. And really, China's where you start to see everything they've built before starts to really go well once they basically have that install base in China. Yeah. And then really for me, it's not quite up and to the right, but this is where the machine really starts to work, and you get into this. You talked about it at the beginning of the podcast, the 11 billion in sales, 1.8 million units, 60,000 employees. And again, if you look at KONE today, it's very easy to see this. This has all happened, and this is just quarterly on quarterly earnings. And when you then look back at this little machine workshop in 1910, it feels very different.
Because it is. It is very different, and of course, when we look back, how was this possible? I think the key thing is that thanks to the focused ownership, because I mean, the voting shares have been in the hands of one person pretty much all the time.
This feels like a royal family, and I don't mean the drama. I mean, this feels like there's only one crown, and it only passes very occasionally.
Yes, and the thing is, there's been opportunities, and many companies see opportunities, but the key here is that, have you had the vision and the ability to essentially risk everything. I mean, always when you are making dramatic changes, always when you are acquiring companies that are as big as you are
Or bigger.
taking enormous risk, but you have to have the trust and ability to go through with the execution part of the transaction. And thanks to the very, very focused decision making, the KONE has demonstrated to have the execution ability, even when the risks have been existential in nature. And the fact that it has become, I'm sure that many other companies have had the same opportunities, but so many companies, especially when the ownership, the ownership is spread around so many stakeholders, that you don't have it's difficult to know what the owner thinks. Here it is easy. You can always ask the owner. It's the execution that is missing for many companies. It hasn't missed with KONE, and that's really their thing.
And again, I've reflected on all the materials we've read, and we're going to go into analysis in a second. But again, for me, that's a big part of the story, which is effectively the concentration of ownership and the ability to risk the business has kept them from being prey on the table of another company. And I think it's particularly extraordinary, and I love Finland, I live here. It's particularly extraordinary that this has happened in a small country, right, which has been very buffeted by, Swedish Empire, Russian Empire, World War II, slap, right? And they've managed to do this. Like, they've threaded the needle so many times. It's so impressive. But just to finish the kind of story part of our podcast, let's talk about this last little bit of the story. So what does this current deal mean for KONE, the TK elevator deal?
Well, I mean, there are a number of major players in the elevator business, and TK, which actually comes from ThyssenKrupp. Thyssen was a separate elevator company. Krupp was owning the ONK escalator company. So Thyssen and Krupp went together, when was it, 20 years ago or so, and created this humongous German industrial conglomerate. And eventually, yes, in 1994, Thyssen was willing to buy the assets of KONE. And I mean, these companies have known of each other very closely all these years. And the only thing is that clearly the fact that the ThyssenKrupp essentially divested the elevator business that is currently owned by essentially investment bankers. That was, for them, it was a strategic statement saying that, okay, ThyssenKrupp is not treating this as a core business. And because it's today owned by investors, it means that it is an asset that is available for acquisition. And yes, it's KONE tried to buy it already once under the leadership of Antti in 2020. The attempt failed. I mean, that was the time when essentially ThyssenKrupp was divesting it, and it went to other investors. And then 2026, that's where the door is once again open. And the logic is there. Among the four, here we are talking about within the four largest elevator companies in the world, two talking about essentially merging. So it's clear that regardless of which way this goes, the combined company will be the largest elevator producer in the world, with no questions asked. It's exactly 1 month ago, KONE announced the agreement with the acquisition with an enterprise value of 29.4 billion. It's a complex transaction. It means that, among others, that Antti Herlin needs to buy with a substantial amount of money, needs to buy back KONE share to show his commitment. So many things. There's no point in analyzing that too much today, but it is clear that KONE is extremely strong in Asia. TKE is very strong in Americas and Europe, and the combined service base is humongous. modernization is becoming more and more important as buildings age, and all these companies have been installing elevators for decades now. So this is yet once again one of those things. I mean, of course, some critics say that the price is too much. KONE is paying way too much. So it means once again the future of KONE is very much dependent on the KONE leadership being able to really extract the economies of scale and scale down the overlapping areas and create a larger new company that is more efficient than the parts of KONE and TKA alone would be. So essentially, once again, the whole future is bet on this one chip. And of course, that can only be done based on the idea that you have to trust, the buyer needs to trust its ability to make this happen.
Yeah, and again, listeners, if you've got this far in the podcast with us, thank you. But what you've also seen is we've done a series of these deals before. Like this is Pekka and Ase. This is Harold back in the day on betting the company multiple times. This is what KONE has to do. And the fact that they've been able to do it within a family structure, or because of the family structure, they've been able to do it, I think is really, really important. Like often families get to a certain stage where the risks are too high and being a good steward is not messing it up, right? Here, the family has managed to create a structure and an attitude, an operating system, whatever you want to call it, where effectively keeping moving forward is the right thing to do. Keeping growing is the right thing to do. And trying to, strength leads to strength and move that forward. So, and again, listeners do feel that we're big fans of Antti at this particular stage, but he's not done yet, right? He's not, he's still a big part of this family. His story is still to play out. And I do really admire what he's managed to create over this period of time, right? He wasn't dealt with, none of these protagonists got an easy set of cards to play, right? And each one of them had to play the cards in the situation they found themselves. Antti has done you may feel we've given Pekka a lot of airtime. Antti has played his cards very well at this particular stage. Not everything works, but I think he has done as good a job as every single one of his forefathers.
Absolutely, and I think the key element that has continued all through this saga so far is that each generation of leadership has treated the company like they would treat the land. That the land is a limited asset. It's no longer produced, and you have to take care of that in the long run. It's kind of a stewardship of making sure that you are able to produce, that the land produces and thrives over decades to come. And this long-term perspective, I think, is one of the driving elements of this success story.
Okay, so we're going to switch gears. We're going to move now into our analysis section. So Marty and I like to look at the business. Once we've told the story and done the research, we like to compare the business against Hamilton Helmer's 7 Powers, which again, all the companies that we study are great. They're all category leaders, but every business model, as we said earlier, refines different things. So Marty, when we look at scale economies, right, where does I bears it to ask because this one's so obvious.
Yeah, it is. I think it started, the scale was, the attitude towards scale was reassessed under the leadership of Pekka, who saw that, okay, we need to grow or we will be eaten. But I mean, and I mean, the thing is, the local service density, when we talk about the service side of business, that came as a result of it in a way. But it is clear that the scale in a business segment that is being consolidated on a global scale, it's clearly, you got to be on the top of it. So not much to debate here.
No, I think that if you've got this far, you've realized that it's a scale economies business. Okay, network economies. So I would say that they've probably got network economies, but more in that route density perspective, which is where scale economies and network economies move forward. As we've said, one elevator in a city doesn't give you any economies of scale, and it doesn't give you your network. But again, architecture is a very kind of like city by city place or specialist by specialist place. So when you start to get one elevator being recommended by an architectural group, you're able to move your service staff across. You can take all these ones. For me, it's a looser power, and it's much more around that route density, but it's still there.
Yeah, I mean, I generally agree with you. The added dimension that I'd like to bring here is that construction business, exactly like our ports in our Maersk episode, they are very political. So as far as networks are concerned, your networks within your city, with your local authorities, including your government, is very critical. So this is very political business in some sense, and that's why being local, even in remote countries, is absolutely essential. And this is not traditional business to business alone. I think there's a strong political and societal element in the networks you need to have.
Look, we didn't tell this story, but I'm going to put it in here because it was the funniest part of my research, was the 1926 Finnish elevator cartel.
Yes.
Now, surprisingly enough, when I was orientated to Finland as a resident, this wasn't part of the briefing. And just to be clear, listeners, cartels in Finland in the 1920s were not illegal, right? But there was a 1926 Finnish elevator cartel where basically the deals got divvied up, right? So there's one for you, and there's one for Marty, and there's one for myself, and that's how the whole thing worked. And again, when you're in a small market, that's how you have to play the game. Right. So I definitely think on that side. Marty, what about counter positioning? Right. It's difficult when you look at the big company today to say they counter position, but how do you view this as a power of the KONE business as a whole?
Yeah, well, the getting rid of the machine room is clearly one of those areas where the incumbent architecture was challenged, and there are other areas like getting rid of the steel in the cables in order to make the cables way lighter than before. There are these elements. I don't know how critical they have been. Yes, they've been challenging. They've been disrupting some of the elements. So it's definitely there, but I probably wouldn't say that this has been the driving force for their success.
No, I'd agree on that one. Look, listeners, if you go to some of these Marina Bay Sands Hotel or the kind of world's tallest tower, most of the time it's a KONE lift, because they actually solve some of the most difficult problems around having a steel cable over 1,000 meters long, which actually became heavier than everything else. So they've done a lot on that kind of scale Mount Everest kind of technological leadership challenge, but I wouldn't say it's a true power for them in terms of other ones. Look, I think what something is very strong is switching costs. Like once you stick an elevator in, this is not software as a service. It ain't coming out next week. Right, you're not swapping from Anthropic to OpenAI or Gemini next, change my token provider. This is staying for the long term.
That's true. But on the other hand, we definitely do know that regardless of the original manufacturer of your elevator in your residential or office building, your competitor may take over the maintenance contract. And once they take over the maintenance contract, they are sneaking to your backyard. And whenever the rebuild is scheduled, they are there. So, I mean, the switching costs, yes, the fundamental switching cost is high, but in the service side, there is the tension all the time.
Yeah, look, it's not like you don't know who these elevators belong to, right? Anybody can, in most cases, go in, ride the elevator, find out that the KONE elevator is there and say, hey, can we take this over on that side? So your service network is kind of open, to attack. And therefore, you've got to be delivering value for your customers, right? You can't be price gouging them on this particular side. Otherwise, they'll take that elevator, which is not a commodity, but effectively is an understandable machine, to somewhere else. Okay, Branding.
When we think about the risks that the construction company takes when they are putting together hundreds and millions to build an entire building, they don't want to take risks on a subsystem supplier. They want the elevators not to be on the critical path when it comes to the taking into use of that new building. So within the professional circles, the brand of the company is absolutely critical. The second thing that I want to say is that when the elevator in your building doesn't work, it's horrible. It can very quickly be very aggravating for the resident. So also the management companies of the buildings who are in charge of managing the ongoing thing, for them the brand matters. If your brand carries that you are the one who can reliably predict when servicing is required, and you can make sure that the availability of the elevator capacity is remaining at a higher level, higher than what your other contractual partners are doing, that can build the brand in the professional circles, but not a consumer brand at all.
Yeah, like this is where you have limited upside but maximum downside as a building management firm, yeah, or building maintenance thing. Because if you want the aggregation of your tenants or your residents, make sure the elevators don't work regularly, and yeah, you will bring a wall of discomfort to your door very, very quickly. Okay, cornered resource. I think the cornered resource is this family, right? To be perfectly honest, they have been able to steward this business from when they acquired it in 1924, 100 years through, right? It's not been easy by any stretch of the imagination, but they have managed to basically turn a small machine workshop in Helsinki as in the Grand Duchy of kind of Finland and turn it into a global category leader. And all credit to them.
Absolutely. And I think the question here is that something that I very often say is that enthusiasm and competence are not necessarily they are not necessarily things that can replace each other. You need both. So in order to make a business successful, you need to be able to make the right decisions and then execute according to the plan. So you have to have skills, capabilities, and bold courage to put this through. It has worked so far well under all the leadership, under all leaders, all our core people in this organization. And I'd like to add Matti Alahuhta as being a pivot person, the person number 5 here in a way, even if he's not in the same role. I think they have done many right decisions. And whether that will continue, whether that continues to be that way, the good side of the story is that KONE is so highly respected company as a whole, and their management development programs, incentive programs, etc., are such that they are still able to attract the best resources globally. If they are able to continue that way, the success can continue.
Yeah,
but it's very much dependent on the people.
Yeah, look, Marty, I totally agree on that one. I think if we then move to process power, we probably haven't given KONE enough credit for the process power, right? And we've kind of done a little bit of like, hey, moral rearmament, Oxford Group, the challenges with Labour, the Reds and the Whites, and Heikki kind of keeping everything going and developing a culture. But it's that culture that developed that mainly has continued to improve the business time over time. This is not just a bigger business generating more money. This is a better business, right? And they've built a high quality management team. This is GE without the Jack Welch brand, right? They've done a huge job to basically develop a sprawling global business with very clear process systems, not just in terms of how the elevators are managed, but how the company is run.
I mean, they were also amongst the first Finnish companies to have systematic executive and leadership management development programs. So they have systematically invested into process power. I mean, we talked so much about the key protagonists here, but I mean, under the leadership of all these people that we have mentioned, there's been many very capable people in the operational management of KONE, and they have been really the ones who are the unsung heroes here in our story, but the people who have actually built the processes that have been supporting the growth and success of the company.
Yeah, and look, it's almost full circle for me, because when you pitched the original idea of doing KONE, I'm like, the elevator company? That's just boring, right? And now
To
I'm
you, perhaps, not to me.
Of course. And now I've kind of come to now we've done all this research and spent all this time on this, and I hadn't realized how dangerous elevators were, right? And then I hadn't realized how many people they move each day. Like, forget cars, elevators and lifts and escalators and travelators move more people than vehicles, right? Every single day, right? It's humans' most used machine, right? And it's dangerous and it's complicated and it's regulated. And KONE has managed to make this ordinary and initially, before I started looking into this, slightly boring. Right, and that the fact that they've been able to do that globally is just tremendously impressive.
Yeah, here.
Okay, so in terms of rankings, I would suggest that effectively it's probably, if we're going from strength onwards, you would have kind of like process power or switching costs and scale economies. They're your very strong top three. Yeah. It's very difficult to rip out an elevator. I heard what you said. So maybe process power, scale economies. I debate whether cornered resource goes into that. Some maybe, because the family has had aspects. And then there's a gap, and then it's brand, counter positioning, network economies in the kind of second half of the table.
Yeah, but all I want to say is that I genuinely believe that the local networks, to the builders, to the architects, to the political decision makers, I would probably raise the importance of network economies from this stakeholder engagement point of view a little bit higher than what we may have originally thought. I think that's important because the company has been operating in a very, very politically sensitive domain everywhere, especially when everything was local. Today it's hopefully probably a little bit easier, but over the growth of the company, to have good relationship with all the various stakeholders that are in many cases are politically motivated is one key success element.
Okay, so closing analysis, just the quintessence, which is kind of where Marty and I like to wrap up. We spent a month, and we do spend a lot of time, listeners, basically studying these companies. And at the end of it, very much a love letter to the company, because we kind of do quite a bit of due diligence before we start the process, because you don't want to spend a month of your time studying a company that you find out that you hate at the end. But generally at this point, I've definitely fell in love with KONE in a way that I wasn't expecting. Right. And it wasn't just the family story. I think it was as much the globalization and the city story. And I do feel that effectively, for me, it was around Harold saw infrastructure, Heikki saw technology, Pekka saw scale, and Antti saw kind of control and focus. Right. And generally, KONE kind of doesn't exist without the family. Yeah, and at this point, the family probably doesn't exist without KONE. But it's each person solved a different problem, the problem of their own time, and they just kept moving forward. And that's kind of where I've gone with this company, is that category leaders are not always built by changing problems, but in this case, this one was.
Yeah, and from my point of view, I mean, in addition to endorsing what you just said, I think the third element here that I want to raise is the element of resilience. I mean, we talk about resilience these days so much. Everybody talks about resilience. And yes, we are facing some global challenges at the moment. But when we look back to the stories about our geography, small market, Russian Empire, Civil War, the war with Soviet Union and reparations and all this, I mean, we are still living in a relatively peaceful time.
Yes.
And the fact that the company has survived all these challenges is a miracle in itself. And it's the strong element of competence. And what I'd like to, and of course, I mean, I'm proud of the fact that this is a Finnish company, and I've for several decades, I've appreciated the company and what it does. But I think the main thing that I think we should, the main lessons learned that we should take away from all this is the importance of the owner and the importance of the operational management of identifying opportunities, making bold decisions, and then execute the decisions accordingly. These are not easy things, especially these days when the ownership of companies can be spread to many faceless owners, and you lose the intergenerational story. But it's still the question: what the owners are asking for the company to do, what kind of people you choose to run the operational side of the business. I think the success here is not by accident. The success is coming from bold decision, seizing the opportunity, and executing your strategy with determination, tenacity, and success.
Yeah, I think this is a great company, great story. So we have a number of thank yous. As you said, as you know, Marty and I do a lot of research on these episodes, but we don't do it alone. So Marty, we had a great lunch with Elias Repo, who was a kind of friend of the family, grew up on the farm, literally in Forsvik, and he was able to give us some great insights. So big thanks to Elias. Marty, you had some in the KONE corporate team you wanted to give a shout out to.
Yeah, well, I mean, I reached out to KONE Communications, and eventually Mariam Gruibi was kind enough to borrow us the English version of the history book. I mean, the Finnish version of the history book that is written by Professor Kalle Mikkelsen, that was easy to find. I bought one for myself, but the English edition was sadly very difficult to find, but Mariam gladly came to help. We just need to return the book.
We will. Don't worry. Yeah. Now this episode's coming out. And then obviously we were able to speak to members of the family. And again, we've tried to obviously keep their confidentiality, but kind of, that was super valuable to hear their part of the story. So big thank you to them. We obviously spoke to a number of corporate executives, both inside KONE and former members of KONE and some of their competitors as part of making this episode. And then Professor Mikkelsen, he was a big help.
He was a big help, and I had a long chat with him about the things that he felt after now a bit more than 10 years since he completed the book, and he was of tremendous help.
Fantastic. So thank you everybody who helped put these episodes together, because again, what we're trying to do is in telling the stories of these best in the world based in Europe companies, not only do we feel better about ourselves, Marty and I love this part of the job, but we also hope that this helps you in thinking about the sort of businesses you want to grow and businesses you want to invest in and businesses that you want to build here in Europe. So this takes us very nice to the next category leader next month, because one of the things we kept bumping into during the KONE story was that KONE was never really alone. There was a degree of repetition in the episode. Names kept recurring, both Stromberg and Ace and Wallenberg, and then on the technical side, there was motors, drives, everything in. We kept bumping into the same suppliers, competitors, etc. all the time. And in that next episode, we're going to give some of those names a real proper exposure as our next category leader. Marty, who are we doing next month?
Well, next month is going to be ABB, which of course the full name of the company was ASEA Brown Boveri from the thing. I mean, companies that existed in the very beginning of this story is today known as ABB, and ABB is a great story of electrical and automation layer underneath the modern economy. It's Swedish through ASEA, it's Swiss through Brown Boveri, it has Finnish elements through Strömberg or Romppanen, like many still in Finland say, and it still sits in exactly the word KONE comes from: motors, drives, electrification, automation, control. So it's not just yet another European industrial company. It's almost the hidden infrastructure behind the hidden infrastructure, and a marvelous company that is still in all these countries mentioned, is still very active, and is of course a huge European powerhouse of engineering.
Yeah, and look, for me, the timing's perfect for the ABB story because I think the world is moving to a different constraint. We've gone through the smart cities mode, right? So KONE solved the cities of growing upwards. ABB may be one of the companies solving these now economies of running out of workers, right? We're talking about the growth of Helsinki, 1875 to 1900, but now, we're living in a world outside Africa where population decline changes the industrial equation, right? It's you have fewer working age people paying taxes, etc., etc. But we do have, certainly in the Nordics, cheap or surplus energy. We have a rise in artificial intelligence, frontier labs, etc. So robotics is more of our conversation today, in the same that workers' rights and Karl Marx was our conversation of the past. So there's a question here around how do we turn energy and intelligence into physical capability?
Yes. And there are elements in the physical world. I mean, exactly like there's a lot of intelligence in elevators and cranes and all that. But something that we kind of missed in Europe, that we, for too long period of time, we didn't fully appreciate the role of manufacturing. And today we are kind of suffering, both in defense and in other areas, that we kind of outsourced the production side of our businesses to countries that are not fully in our control or not always fully collaborating with us. And ABB is one of those companies, very strong in energy, very strong in AI, but still having a strong foothold in the actual manufacturing, because interacting with the real world still needs the physical side of things.
Say it better ourselves. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. Join Marty and I next month when we're basically be telling the story of ABB. And obviously, if you've got any feedback for us on this podcast or anything else, please let us know. We love hearing from you. We enjoy making these episodes, and we enjoy even more when people tell us how much they've enjoyed these episodes. So have a great month, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much. Take care.